So does anybody? I'm going to call. Is that Robert's rules?
That's usual.
Mr. Mr. Randall, because he's the one who.
Put out a personal plea. Someone to please.
Oh. That was. I know. Oh, they don't make strong enough. Throw in something helping us, which is that Dennis and glad for.
Details. Those things.
Being helped by her.
Specifically, she does reconciliation. Make sure that I pennies or nickels or dimes.
Yes.
So she's checking.
Exactly.
Oh, you don't want to mess with the go. This time. Now the election, I feel better, the elections. Now, if Gary brings the proceedings, he will, and all, you can just pull your ballot down and we can proceed. Individuals that will count the votes tomorrow, and when we take the vote. So I have to do that, that's the other thing, and then they also approve or say this is who won. So I believe that's all I have to do with respect to the vote. Mr. Vice President, do you concur?
I concur.
Okay, so does that mean we can move on to the next?
Close nominations.
Oh. I guess so I'm going, if nobody has any further nominations, I'm going to close the nomination so somebody has to second that, I believe.
You can't make that nomination.
Oh.
It's your president.
So
A motion on the floor.
okay, we need a motion on the floor.
I move to close the nomination.
Second.
We're done.
Yeah. Okay, are we good, Bruce?
We're good.
I always check with Bruce. He's the procedures man. Okay, so what's next, Mr. Vice President?
We have an illustrious presentation.
My favorite.
This will be great. Bob is going to talk about antennas.
Oh, Bob the antenna man. Thank you, Bob.
I'm here.
Yay, Bob is here.
So did you enjoy the presentation?
Yeah. All hail Bob.
Bob, how's the pronunciation of last name? Help me out here.
Do you have a VGA?
Pardon?
Do you have VGA?
No, I don't have any slides with me. I'm just going to use the whiteboard.
Oh, okay.
If that's okay with everybody.
That's fine.
We should do that red line. You should turn the camera
We're a good-natured fellow.
off. Which one is most convenient for everybody?
That was most convenient for me.
You
got it.
Well, Chip,
Move back and forth.
Chip,
Squeeze
see
into
that
the red line.
You see that red line right there?
Okay, yeah.
Now you will be able to go past the red line.
Okay.
Don't let it go to your head, okay?
Alrighty. Okay, wait a minute, I want to sales pitch here first.
Where's the free copies of the book?
No, here's the book.
There's the book.
The book. So this presentation is based on basically chapters, mostly chapter 2 out of here and chapter 3.
That's
So-
ARRL antenna?
ARRL antenna physics.
Oh, okay.
And I would ask, because I'm approaching now, I figured a rough estimate in terms of the amount of hours I've put into writing this and the amount of money I've gotten on royalties, and I'm approaching minimum wage. So,
All right.
so each one gives me about the equivalent of a beer. So-
Cheap beer, cheap beer.
Cheap beer, right. Okay, so, the object in writing this antenna book was over a period of 20 or 30 years working in RF. I've attempted to explain, particularly to non-technical management people, some of the realities of antennas in terms of manufacturing, et cetera, as well as engineers. And I was amazed to find that electrical engineers, even with specialty in RF, didn't understand a lot of the basic concepts of antennas. And it's not unusual because most of the books that discuss antenna theory fall into one of two categories. One is the basic books like you get from the ARRL antenna book and the handbook, etc., which explain how to cut an antenna, and maybe they kind of flirt with more advanced ideas, but they're really not explained very well. Like for path loss calculations, they give you a log equation, but there's no way that you can derive that and figure out where it came from. So the other type of books are the classic textbooks by Krauss and Balanis and Shelnikoff, and they've been written over the past 60 years or so. There's some very good classic books, but they're filled with calculus. So if you open the book up, most people throw their hands up and walk away. So this book this is an attempt to kind of bridge the gap. So an assumption is made that there's some basic knowledge from the reader in terms of basic electronics anyway, and maybe some idea, some intuitive knowledge of antennas, and maybe some advanced knowledge of antennas. Based on that, I'll take some of the concepts, or many of the concepts presented particularly in Krauss's book, and distill that calculus down into something that is a lot more intuitive. Many of the equations that I'm going to be talking about are derived from these complex equations, but the complex equations end up, in many cases, probably the majority of cases, to be just special iterations of the power law or Ohm's law. And once you understand those relationships, you start to get, because you can relate it to what you already know about electronics, you can begin to relate it to something that's more intuitive. So I'm going to start with a very simple concept, and we're going to build from there. Okay? So let's say we have a sphere, and at the center of a sphere, we put a light bulb. And the light bulb has a very special characteristic in that it emits the same amount of light power in all directions, in all three-dimensional directions, equally. Okay? So let's say this light bulb is 100 watts, and the 100 watts is light power. Never mind efficiency or heat or anything like that. We're emitting 100 watts of light power, and therefore the 100 watts of light power is distributed equally over the surface of the sphere because it's emitting the same amount of power in all directions. It's an isotropic source. Everybody see that? Any problems with the word isotropic? It means in all directions. Okay, so anybody know what the surface area of the sphere is?
4/3 pi r cubed, maybe?
Square.
That's
4
the
pi r
volume
squared.
of the sphere.
4 pi r squared.
You got it. Okay, now let's say we put a solar cell on our sphere. And that solar sphere is 100% efficient. Really good solar cell. Okay, and the solar cell has an area of AE. So our power transmitted is 100 watts. Okay, so the received power by our solar cell then is equal to 100 watts times the ratio of AE to the total surface area, correct? Okay, so that's simple enough. Now we can make the jump and say that any antenna has an equivalent aperture or area, gathering area, or receive area. In the case of a parabolic antenna, a perfect parabolic antenna, the aperture is defined by the area of the parabola, cross-sectional area, right? So that's easy to figure out. Okay, now, if we want to calculate, now we've related aperture here to this, to an area, or the antenna to an area. What is the aperture? Let's say we put an isotropic antenna as a receive antenna on the sphere. Does anybody know the aperture of an isotropic antenna? Okay, this term is absolutely key. This is the hinge pin term that links the whole concept of antenna gain to antenna aperture, and all kinds of magical formulations come from that. And I'm not going to go into it, I'm just going to state what it is. But the aperture of an isotropic antenna, of an ISO, is lambda squared over 4 pi. If you walk away from anything from this presentation, that is the equation you want to learn, walk away from. Okay, now, if we know that this is equal to AE, then the power received by an antenna is equal to the power transmitted times lambda over 4 pi r squared. That is your path loss between two isotropic antennas. So if you have a transmit isotropic antenna and a receive isotropic antenna at distance r, this is the ratio of your power transmitted to the power received. Okay? Now notice here that r is equal to the distance from here to here, right? So distance. So if we break this guy out, we have 1 over d squared, which is the inverse square law. So the inverse square law is derived from spherical trigonometry as part of, and the inverse square law obviously holds for any frequency or wavelength, which is here. Okay, so in ham radio there's a lot of mystery about, okay, well, if I work 2 meters, 2 whips, 2 mobile units, I can go a lot farther than I can at 432 megahertz. Okay, and so the whole thing is that they say it's because 2 meters goes farther. And it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with this term. So as the wavelength gets shorter, your path loss, assuming isotropic to isotropic, the path loss increases. Okay, everybody see that? That's your first concept here. So if we have that, now we have everything. Let's say we have a mountaintop and an antenna and an antenna, and we know the distance. And if we just know the gain of the antennas and the distance, without being armed with the aperture of the antenna, we can't calculate a path loss. And this path loss goes not only for one antenna to another on top of 2 mountains, but it also has to do with Cassiopeia to their antenna on the ground. So this has to do, this is not only for radio waves, but it's also for light waves, for radio telescopes, garage door openers, you name it. This is the same term. Okay, so we can calculate then what the power received is. So we have, again, I'll write it again. Power received is equal to power transmitted times lambda squared over 4 pi d squared. So we have distance, we have frequency, and we have a ratio of powers, transmitted to power. So that's all you need to do that calculation. It's as simple as that. Now in the handbook, they give
On the
you...
equation down there at the bottom, you had lambda, but up there you have lambda squared.
No, this is lambda squared outside of the parentheses. I
Oh,
have
okay.
the same thing
All right.
down here, so it's lambda squared. It's also outside the
All right,
parentheses
fine.
here too.
Fine, that's fine.
Okay, so basically, the way we get that is we take the isotropic, okay, here we had the aperture, right? The aperture of what we're receiving. So this was AE over 4 pi r. Let me go through the algebra here. I'm jumping a little ahead. I feel a little pressured for time because this is normally a 2-hour ordeal here. So if we have AE and we put lambda squared over 4 pi, which is the aperture, lambda squared over 4, this is the aperture of an isotropic. So we substitute lambda squared over 4 pi for the receive aperture. We put that over the sphere, and this is equal to lambda over 4 pi r squared. By simple algebra, simple substitution. Okay, so that's your coefficient. So notice the beautiful simplicity of this equation. It's a very simple equation to figure out some rather intuitively complicated problem of figuring out what a path loss is. Okay, now, since this is the aperture, okay, now let's say we have an aperture here of our, let's go back to our solar cell again. Okay, so how do we double the power from a solar cell?
Double the area.
Double the area. And it's also, from a gain standpoint, what have we done by doubling the area? We've increased the power reception by a factor of 2. Okay, so it's 3 dB, so the power factor is a factor of 2. So we've increased the gain by 3 dB, or a linear gain by 2. So if we have two times an isotropic antenna, it's simply 2 lambda squared over 4 pi. So this is the aperture with it. So this is a gain, in other words, a gain of 0 dBi is equal to an aperture of lambda over 4 pi, lambda squared over 4 pi, right? So if we have 3 dBi, our aperture is 2 times lambda squared over 4 pi. So the linear gain term is simply the coefficient of that term. So we can relate back and forth between antenna gain and aperture by that simple equation. So if you have a 3 dB gain antenna, and you want to know what its aperture is, you simply take the anti-log of 3 dB, which is 2, well, very close anyway, 2 lambda squared over 4 pi. So now you know the equivalent area of the antenna for a 2 dB or any G number. Okay? I just laid out a lot of stuff here, so questions, problems? Yes?
To review again, the lambda squared over 4 pi is for an isotropic.
That's the aperture of an isotropic antenna. That's the area, gathering area of an isotropic antenna. And because it's isotropic, no matter which direction you go,
Yeah.
it's going to show a gathering area of lambda squared over 4 pi. Now, when you increase the gain, That's the maximum gain direction. Okay, so you might have no response. So, and you can think of it as a solar cell again. So if you're the sun over there, and I put my maximum aperture is going to be if I'm perpendicular to the direction of the light. As I move away, I'm getting less and less aperture until I'm tangent with you.
Yeah.
And now it's 0, and then of course if I go this way it's 0. So the pattern of a solar cell is something like this, where this is the cosine, and actually the power is a cosine squared of the angle, because power is the square of the intensity of the field. Okay? Any other questions? No question. That means one of two things if there's no questions.
You're doing a great job.
Which one's more probable?
Yeah.
That's where I'm going. I'm a little worried about that. Okay, so everybody understand what I just said? Excellent. Okay, so now you've broken into new territory. So you can calculate, okay, if you got gain here, and you got gain here, then this ends up being gain of your transmitter, gain of your receiver, lambda squared over 4 pi.
Can you write higher on the board?
Pardon?
Can you write higher on the board?
Oh, yes. Okay, so if you got a gain here, you have to go to a linear gain now, right? Rather than, so your power received is equal to the power transmitted times gain of the, let's say this is the transmitter and this is the receiver, just to separate them. Gain of the receiver, lambda over 4 pi r squared. That's everything you need to know about calculating that length. Assuming free space, of course. Okay, when you start, so all prediction areas for coverage area are based on this equation. The reason you spend tens of thousands of dollars on those modeling programs is that they figure out what happens when stuff gets in the way. It's not line of sight. If it's line of sight, and for astronomical, for radio astronomy purposes, you can assume line of sight, pretty much. Unless you're going through clouds, you know, nebula clouds or whatever else might be out there. But basically, in most cases, it's a free space calculation. So the free space calculation is one of the simplest calculations in radio astronomy, or for the optical astronomy, for that matter, because there's nothing in the way.
That's how they determine power.
What? Did I hear something? No? Yes?
Is the aperture lambda over 4 pi, lambda squared over 4 pi, is that for a full wave dipole?
No. Isotropic antenna is different than a dipole. A dipole is directional.
Okay.
Okay? And the gain of a dipole is about 1.62. So the aperture of a dipole, broadside to the dipole, not off the ends, now this is maximum gain, is 1.62 lambda squared, lambda squared over 4 pi. So that's the aperture of a dipole. Now intuitively, as you know, as the wavelength gets longer, the dipole gets longer, and intuitively you say, well, a longer dipole probably has more gathering area than a short dipole, because it's bigger, okay, in one dimension. So that's where that lambda term comes in. And if you look at a dipole, the actual aperture looks something like this. There's no distinct line in free space that says you're in the aperture and you're out of the aperture. So it's kind of a gradual transition from one to the other. Okay? Now, while I have this little diagram up here, let's go into the idea of stacking Yagis. And you'll know that you can't just stack a Yagi one right on top of each other, because what happens if you did that? If you put another dipole right on top of it, you're duplicating the aperture. So it's like taking two solar panels, and if one solar panel is partially covering the other, you're going to start to reduce the total amount of power that you can receive. So you have to have enough separation so that you're into unique gathering areas or unique apertures. So that determines then a basic minimum separation for two dipoles to get 3 dB gain. That's the most you can get out of stacking two antennas. It's 3 dB because you've doubled the aperture of the antenna. Too close, what happens? You start to double cover the power flux in that aperture. Okay, so the higher the gain of the antenna, like a Yagi antenna, the greater the spacing has to be. Because as you increase the gain of the Yagi, you increase the aperture, which means you have to separate the Yagi in. So that's why, again, aperture, a knowledge of aperture and what's happening with it is very helpful in how to stack antennas. Or if you ever build a dipole, an array of dipoles on a ground plane for a radio telescope, you have the same issue. Okay? And you guys are...
Are you going to calculate the power of the source from an astronomical object?
Pardon me?
Are you working to calculate the power of the source from an astronomical object?
You can do that already. It's already tackled.
Yeah, well, no,
It's down drawn. The whistle's been blown, plays over. I mean, it's
I thought you were going to give us some examples of some numbers.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
what I
because,
thought.
okay, so you can work backwards here, right? If you know this, and you know this, and you certainly know this, and let's say you can make an assumption that your astronomical object is omnidirectional, that's usually a pretty good thing. So our transmitter gain is lambda squared over 4 pi. You know what lambda is because that's where your receiver's tuned to. Then, and you know your gain of your receiver. You know the frequency, so you've got everything you need to know. You know how, or you either have to know how far it is, or if you know how much power, to calculate how much power is transmitted, if you know how far it is, so you can calculate any of these by just rearranging the equation. So that's the equation you use. And of course, astronomical units, you got to go into meters, so it's, 327 times 10 to the 15th or something like that, meters, so astronomically large numbers. Yes?
Assuming the transmitter is an isotropic source, why isn't this gain 1 instead of lambda squared over 4 pi?
Because if you take the gain, the linear gain is 1, but 10 log base 10 of 1 is 0. So it's 0 dBi. But the gain is 1 for an isotropic antenna.
Right. So why is it lambda squared
Why is it 1 on that
4 pi
equation?
appearing twice in the power equation?
Well, that's the aperture.
It's appearing twice, that once for the receive side, I guess, but why on the transmit side?
Oh,
Why isn't that the 1?
okay, because this is the, right, this would be 1, correct. Sorry, good call. Yep, you got me.
I'm listening.
First time, let's let it be at that.
Go ahead, real fast.
Someone else raise their
What
hand, yes?
tripped me up when I, got into radio astronomy was that you hear a lot about temperatures and flux densities.
Temperatures?
Antenna temperature.
Like
Antenna
temperatures
temperature.
and flux densities and the steradian area in the sky.
Yes. Okay, well, you've opened several cans of worms in there.
Yeah, I know.
That's what he does.
Okay, so let's take antenna temperature. Okay,
Well, no, don't let me interrupt. continue.
No, antenna temperature is good, we can go off in that area, because now you know everything you need to know about antenna aperture and how it relates to gain. So you guys are fast, man. Picked it up. Normally, it takes half hour, 45 minutes. It's 20 minutes. It's a record break.
It helps to read your book.
It does?
Yeah.
Did you read my book?
Uh-huh.
Oh. What am I doing up here?
We're a school of records.
Okay, noise temperature is proportional to noise power. It's a degree Kelvin. So if, in the book I go into okay, if you look at, let's say, the power, and this is a Planck's constant, right? So if we start down here at HF, let's say, and this is L band, and this is maybe 100 gigs, etc., infrared, and visible light. Okay, the sun kind of looks like that, with about 6,000 degrees Kelvin at somewhere in the middle of the visible light band is where it peaks out. The equation that defines this curve in terms and relates Planck's and Boltzmann's constant to the thermal temperature of a source is a really messy equation. However, notice that down here in the HF bands, or down in the RF bands where we're working, it distills down, it simplifies down to Boltzmann's constant, which is BT. So Boltzmann's constant, let's just, I can't remember the name of it. So
K?
K, that's right, KTRB. Well, we don't need R here in this case. So B is the bandwidth, so there's a linear relationship to bandwidth. So this is noise temperature. This is the noise power in a given bandwidth. This is the temperature in kelvins, and this is Boltzmann's constant. So this very simple term is all you need, thank goodness, for determining the noise power at RF frequencies, all the way up into VHF. And in fact, even at like 2 or 3 degrees Kelvin, the peak is like 60 or 70 gigahertz.
168?
Yeah, we're way down there.
Yeah.
Okay. And at absolute zero, of course, there's none. There's no noise power. This is a linear relationship. So if you, like in Krauss, and I copy this in the book, let's say you go into an anechoic chamber and you put an antenna in the anechoic chamber, and the anechoic chamber is at, what's room temperature? About 290. How much?
290 Kelvin.
290 degrees Kelvin inside an anechoic chamber. Just the temperature of the anechoic chamber will give you a noise power, which is about minus 173 dBm per hertz.
Irrespective of the gain.
Irrespective of the gain. As long as the gain is equal to 1 or greater, because if it's a lossy dipole, well, even with a lossy dipole, you're probably going to see the same thing, okay?
Because the loss is at that temperature.
Right. So as you change the temperature inside the anechoic chamber, you're going to change the power linearly. I put dB up there, but from a linear power standpoint, if you have the temperature, you pick up 3 dB less noise. Okay? Now, if we
Just
take...
to nail your point, temperature is power, it's not volts.
It's what?
Temperature is power, not volts.
Correct.
Just to make
It's linear.
it's absolutely clear.
Right. Or if you want to use volts, you need to take volt squared. Current or power would be squared. Okay, so also if you take just a resistor at 290 degrees Kelvin, and you measure it across a voltmeter, you will measure minus 173 dBm across the RF spectrum. Per hertz. Per hertz. Per hertz. Double the bandwidth, you double the power.
With perfect voltage.
With, well, yeah, it's basically double the power. Double the much power. It's Gaussian noise, and Gaussian noise plus Gaussian noise is equal to Gaussian noise. So it's a linear relationship. Okay, now if we point the antenna at a place in the sky that has a noise temperature of 290 degrees Kelvin, we will see the same power, but in this case we've got gain with the antenna, so we factor in the gain. So you can calculate the noise temperature of your celestial source by dividing by the gain and looking at the received noise power.
But the source has to be larger than the field of view of your antenna for that to be true, right?
Yes, otherwise the
the
antenna
source
simply
be diluted by the quiet background, is that?
Well, what happens is you have to integrate the noise over an area. So you have to do a calculus equation. It's basically the integral of the noise within that area. So let's say you have, here's your beam width of your antenna looking at the sky, right? And let's say, for sake of argument, that half of this is at 5 degrees Kelvin and half is at 205 degrees Kelvin. Then you're going to see 100 degrees. So it's the integration of the definite integral of the area. So it's a double integral, x, y coordinate. Yes?
I think you're wandering off the track there.
I'm wandering off the way?
Off the track. I'll just say that and let you carry on.
Okay, well, I had a specific question, and this is for your advantage, you know, so you can pick me, and if I don't know something, I'll admit it right off the bat, I don't know. There's a lot of things I don't know about antennas, but it was a specific question, and it relates directly
We never have a source that fills the vein.
to radio astronomy. I mean, the question is directly related.
Cosmic microwave background data.
Yeah. So that's noise temperature. So and this is interesting because the physical temperature of the antenna does not relate to the noise temperature of the antenna. And so what you need, one moment. What you need to do is measure the value of a resistance. And the resistance in the antenna is 50 ohm. The radiation resistance, RR, which often is also the feed point impedance, like of a dipole, but is not necessarily the feed point impedance of a dipole. Yeah. That's right. Okay, for example, okay, which leads to the next topic. Yes, you had a question. Let me be fair. Yes.
The noise temperature, not the noise received from some other object, the noise temperature of an antenna is correct, not the function of the temperature of the antenna.
Yep.
It is a function of the area around the antenna that is being received by the side lobes.
Oh, well, that's part of the pattern of the antenna, and that's part of the integration. So
Yeah, that's why I objected to the term, the temperature of the antenna
okay.
is not.
Well,
Yeah, you're getting into the subtleties of the calculation and the integration. Basically, what you have.
But that
like here,
subtlety is what determines antenna temperature.
okay, but here we determine that the noise temperature of a celestial source, this is assuming that the antenna is only responding to this steradian up in the sky. That's the way you determine it. If the sky, for example, if you have a parabolic antenna,
That's
and
not
right,
the
and
noise
you're
temperature.
looking at side lobes and you're seeing the ground is 290 degrees Kelvin. And the rest of it is what you're seeing here. So now the integration, as opposed to being half and half here, is whatever the response is to the ground, which is 290 degrees. You're going to see that. But you also have to integrate that against whatever the noise temperature is coming in your beam from the celestial source. So you're partially right. It's a combination
You're
of the
just
two.
using link budgets and antenna temperature.
I'm just assuming that what the noise temperature is at the receiver. I don't care what the link budget is in this case. I don't care. All that matters is what my antenna is seeing in terms of noise power coming in.
It's also called flux density, right?
Right,
Correct.
Yeah.
right. Well,
Which is link
Okay.
budget.
well, well, you can look at it another way. How do you measure signal strength? How is signal strength of a radio wave defined?
Decibels?
Hmm?
Decibels.
Flux density, right?
No,
Correct.
no. The signal strength of a radio wave.
Volts per meter.
Volts per meter.
Well, it could be amps per meter too.
Or
Or amps per meter. Now what if we multiply the two together? What do we get?
Power.
Power density.
No, we get watts
Or
per meter squared.
flux density.
So voltage, and so the field, this is the field intensity of the electrical field. This is the field intensity of the magnetic field in the electromagnetic field. If we want to calculate the power of that electromagnetic wave, we simply have to multiply the two values by each other, and it ends up being a special case of the power law. And so notice we not only get watts from volts and amps, but we also get a dimensional transformation. So power is a flux density, which is a two-dimensional issue. So power is always defined by two dimensions, whereas the field intensity is measured by one dimension. Okay, this is a nice little sidebar here. When you start talking about Maxwell's equations and the relationships between the magnetic and the magnetic.
Yeah, so that's where the 377 ohms comes in. Because if you know the volts per meter, then you know the space is 377 ohms, then you can calculate.
You can calculate the amps precisely right.
Yeah, the amps of the-
Lanewave group.
Okay, and so if we have, it's a good point, and how do we get 377 ohms, you know?
Somebody, I assume somebody carefully measured volts per meter.
Okay,
and
but
amps
you
per
can
meter on the
actually
radio,
use-
but took a ratio.
First you get Maxwell, and then you get pH.
Well, you take, it's rho over rho naught over epsilon naught. So this is the permeability of free space, and this is the permittivity of free space. The square root of those is equal to, when you cancel all the terms in there, you end up with R or Z. And that ends up as being 377 ohms in free space. Okay? Now, when Maxwell was first messing around with his equations, he also noticed that 1 over the square root of rho naught epsilon naught is equal to speed of light. So back in the 1850s and 1860s, these are static measurements because you could take a given magnetic flux and you knew what free space was. You could calculate it because it was a static measurement. It was also a static measure, and they had good scales back then. You could measure a physical force. So the physical force in newtons, as well as these other terms that define these terms, end up being part of C. So Maxwell calculated C within 1% of today's known speed of light in free space, which was much better calculation than the direct measurements in the 1860s when he came up with that equation. So he also said, okay, that's the speed of light, and at the time, by that time, they knew that light was a, so he determined that it must be a wave, because you can derive the wave equation from Maxwell's equations, which I also do in this book. That's probably, I had to put that in this book, even though it's kind of nasty reading from integral calculus and differential. It's actually a second order differential equation for the wave equation. So not only that, but Maxwell said, well, you can have any term omega, which is frequency or wavelength. Therefore, he not only predicted the existence of radio waves 20 years before they were discovered, but he nailed exactly all of their parameters. That's how smart that guy was. Okay, so he predicted, and then Hertz came along and actually demonstrated, was the first one in the 1880s, that actually demonstrated the existence of radio waves. So this holds for light. So we can relate an impedance of free space and the speed of light in free space. Now in a piece of glass, what happens? Epsilon goes up, right? The dielectric constant of glass is higher than dielectric constant of free space. So our characteristic impedance changes of free space, but also the speed of light in glass slows down. So this is all precisely defined by these simple terms.
Well, polyethylene inside of a coax cable is the same thing, right?
Correct. So it takes longer to charge the capacitors as the charge goes down a transmission line, which slows it down. So the speed of light is the square root of that. So your velocity factor is 1 over the square root of the velocity factor. So velocity factor of 1 is free space. So your term that if you have a dielectric constant in a coaxial line, like you're saying, of 4, then your velocity factor is going to be 2, or close to it, because there's other effects in there. But basically, that's what's defining. Correct.
Isn't it usually mu?
What?
It's usually mu, not rho, right?
Oh, yeah, mu. I'm sorry. You know, I haven't looked at this. I didn't prepare for this. I just came. You know, while I'm here, you know, would you guys be interested in this? So here, I don't even have slides with me. So yeah, that's mu. So, thank you, Skip. That's why I bring him along.
But you were riding in his vehicle, so is it really the other way around?
Pardon?
I says, you were riding in his vehicle.
I was riding the vehicle.
In his vehicle.
Yeah,
When I first saw you, so he was bringing you along.
Yeah, but I swung that too. I didn't have to drive.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we would be.
Any other questions? Yes.
You were talking about stacking
Yeah.
and one of the, we're trying to set up a pulsar receiver with Yagis.
Yep.
And part of that is the stacking like you do with the EME antenna, but the other one is the phasing. When you're aiming at a pulsar, and because of the timing pulses coming in, and whether that would cause double the timing pulses or, you know, things like that when you got stacked.
Well, you want to be perpendicular. So let's say you've got stacking. It's the same issue as with EME type thing like you brought up. So you have a plane, and it can be a conducting plane, or you can just ignore it and just rely upon the reflectors of the Yagi. But you do this, and you make sure that they're all lined up perfectly, and that your coaxial lines are all in phase, so that you got some kind of combiner here, and these lengths of this coaxial cable are absolutely the same length to make sure that everything is in phase in one direction. So you get off phase, you're right, you get off a little bit with this, and things get out of phase very quickly. Right? Okay? So your pattern might look like, let's say here's your azimuth pattern, and then you get these nasty side lobes like this. depending upon aperture. I also go into that in my book, what these side lobes look like.
In your opinion, is it possible when you're looking at pulses on a pulsar, and they're all in the almost millisecond levels,
Yep.
that it's possible to actually build one of these things, or you just stay with a single Yagi? Or a
No, it's
single
better to
dish?
build multiple Yagis because you're going to have more gain.
Yeah, but it's
And you're going to have a sharp, more gain means a narrower, or more directivity means a narrower beam width. You know the difference between directivity and gain? Very simple.
It's just the pulses, I think
Gain is equal to directivity times efficiency.
you get out of phase so easy with pulses instead of just this normal plane wave you get from a normal source.
No, that's not true, because the pulse is just a narrow, it's a short time duration, but it's a plane wave.
You still think I can do it, okay?
Yeah, it's a plane wave.
No, the pulse timing is going to be very, very long compared to the propagation time between two stacked antennas.
Yeah, if you're talking milliseconds, yeah, a millisecond in light terms is like 1,000 miles, right? 186,000 miles per second, so millisecond is much, much bigger than that. You're talking about picoseconds and nanoseconds here in terms of. But even at that, if everything's in phase, in principle, there should be no time delay between one and the other. That's your goal in designing the antenna. Because the wavelength is going to be much more important to get that in phase than any pulse duration. Pulse duration is huge compared to your wavelength.
Okay. This is not an argument with you, like all my other comments.
Okay.
But just an aside to what you're talking about is.
You could argue with me, I don't care.
In the situation where you're talking about with multiple Yankees, the way to get another step up that isn't obvious is not to combine them before the LNA, but after independent LNA.
In DSP, then you can correct for phase iteration. But then you need a separate receiver for each antenna and do a separate data conversion for each antenna. And
But
then go into
if
DSP.
you're trying to get as much bang, assuming your DSP and receivers don't cost anything, all you're buying is Yankees.
That's the number one.
All you're buying is Yankees.
Right.
Yep.
You
That's-
want,
yes,
one,
yes.
one thing to add, because we are, this is getting even more fun, is that depends on your back end, right? Because if you can buy for fairly low cost these days, 50 and 100 megahertz digitizers. And if you can look at 100 megahertz and you can digitize, it means you can reject frequencies. And if you can reject RFI, then you probably want to look over 100 megahertz for qualifiers. Well, that means 300 to 600 or 300 to 500, 400 something. Well, then we don't want to use Yagis anymore, we want to use log periodics. So really, we're talking about multi-element antennas.
Right, yeah, well, log periodic is simply an attempt at a broadbanded Yagi.
Right. An array of log periodics is a pretty good pulsar antenna set.
Well, yeah, if you want to go across a much wider
And
frequency.
that's what I'm saying, is today the back ends are oftentimes, because there's the thing with pulsars that they have to be de-dispersed. So depending on what your bandwidth is, which gives you the sensitivity, you might want to de-disperse because the pulses arrive at such a variety, due to the dispersion measure, time versus frequency, which means they don't sum up anymore in linear power.
I knew there was a reason. See, he drove, he's my backup, and now he's taking over the presentation. I can pop a cold one in another 5 minutes. Any other
But the
questions?
point is, if you're building gain antennas, don't automatically assume you put a X portion of the wavelength apart and equal phase them together. Because there's much better ways to skin this these days.
That was my follow-on question. You never said how far apart you need the antennas to keep them out of each other's.
Well, as the gain goes up, especially with the Yagi antenna, the aperture starts to look circular as opposed to elliptical from a dipole. So as you add more and more elements, this thing starts to look more circular.
So they need to be at least one gain apart.
Well, you can do the calculation of what the aperture is. And as long as so you separate it, so you draw a circle of that area around looking down the boom of your Yagi. So this thing looks like this. So you want to put it out here somewhere.
Okay.
Minimum. So that's a simple calculation. And it's certainly a good approximation for, you might want to get in, if you're investing a lot of money, the more money you invest and the more time you invest in building an antenna, the more detail you want to know. But for approximations, how much is this going to cost if I do this? To know what kind of structure you're going to have to, you can get pretty close through these simple equations. Okay? Anything else? No. Okay, so are we finished?
Yep.
You look like you're...
I'm stressing.
Because
I got somebody else behind you. Go ahead.
Okay, so that's it. Okay, so I'm going
Yeah, wait for the move. You have it.
You want your drink?
I know you did. We both went together. We have a break, but obviously you didn't read it.
We have the fishing schedule.
No, it's something else. Yeah, apparently. He put it up on the board.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I need to go get my mobile.
sold over $6,000.
That's stellar.
It's about 120,000.
Well, gentlemen, our next presentation victim. I got a call one day, and the guy introduced himself as Kerry, and he says, "Hey, I'm one of the inventors of the itty bitty," and I went, "What?" So it's like I finally got to meet the itty bitty guy. So I was like, "Good," and so that was just like, okay. And so the next 45 minutes, my wife came in here about 3 times, put her hands on her hips, like, "What are y'all talking about? We're having fun, okay?" So Kerry is the one that started the York College extravaganza, and there are
Other people involved with, yeah.
But so he's the technical guy. So
The IBT story is that's another story. But I was thinking about this title, and it really should be titled Eric Sauter's Science Fair Project and How We Acquired a 4.5 meter dish antenna for radio astronomy outreach. But I knew that would be too long. So, next slide. I'm going to give you the history. Todd Allery is going to give you his contribution to the project in the way of software and what the real mission of the project is. I think that's the next. The journey begins 2003, and you can go to the next slide. I get a call from a junior in high school that's doing a science fair project, and he says, I'm building a radio telescope. That's pretty cool. He said, but I'm having a problem. I got the dish built, but I'm having problems with the electronics. Eric, at that time, his mechanical aptitude was off the chart. This is a junior in high school, and he builds a 10-foot equatorial configured 10-foot dish radio telescope that you sold. And so I said, Eric, I think I have an idea. Let me come over and see what you have. So at this point, 2003, 98 is when we developed the IVT, by the way. So I was modifying these Channel Master satellite dish alignment meters as a receiver. And so he shows me what he has, and it's a commercial satellite receiver, and he didn't know anything about AGC and things of that sort. So I said, toss that out. Let's use the C-band commercial LMB that you have. We're going to go into a Channel Master meter that I modified, and I think we're going to get you up and running. So 2 visits, and he was up and running. And next slide, see where we are. This is the modified Channel Master meter. On the back side of it is an interface. So all I did is just took the detected output, and I went through Jim Sky's SkyPipe, and we used the Max 187 AZ converters, a 12-bit AZ converter, and I also brought out an analog output. Inside the box was the electronics for the, there was a little, we have a laser pointer, right? It's green. You don't print. All right, so what I did is I wanted to have a wide supply range. So you could power this thing from 6 volts to 12 volts input. And this was a little power inverter to get me up to 15 volts to supply to the Channel Master meter. And so we had, down here was a DC amplifier that I boosted the output of the detected output. Down here is the Max 187, and DC input power on and off. And then DC out to the CM Channel Master stat line. So this was a pretty, you can see it was all in breadboard, and it was put it together pretty quickly for him. And so next slide, he hooks this thing up, and I'll never forget it. We're up in he has all this receiving equipment up on the in his bedroom. And when we put it on the sun, he's like hooting and hollering, jumping up and down, and Eric's mom's like, what in the world's going on up there? He said, we're seeing the sun, Mom. He says, I see the sun quite well out here. He goes, no, we're detecting it with a radio telescope. So he goes off and he does the science fair project. He makes 75 observations, and he captures 22 solar flare events. So Eric did a correlation between sunspots and solar flare activity, presented it at his high school science fair, and he ends up winning the champion. There was grand champion and champion. And if you're a grand champion and champion, you get to go to the International Science and Engineering Fair in Portland, Oregon. He goes there, and he actually wins I think it was like a 3rd place prize, and he gets a $5,000 scholarship. So, next slide. And here he is. There's a little paper. I want you to look at this picture very closely. So this is his 10-foot Channel Master dish antenna. Look at his right ascension counterweight and his declination counterweight. He didn't have to motorize the declination because he was on the sun. That was mechanically fixed, and he just tweaked it as he needed to. But down here, and I can't believe I don't have a picture, he was driving this thing with an electric clock motor. When I saw this, I said, what's the motor driving this thing? He says, that's it right there. And it's just a little electric motor. And he belt drove this thing. And I said, okay, this is, I get the gear ratio thing, but I said, what are you doing about, if it's belt driven, what are you doing about wind loading? Isn't it going to slide? He goes, oh yeah, I wanted to do that. I go, why? Well, as a safety thing. I said, well, where is the critical wind velocity? He said, well, up around 20 miles an hour, then it will move. I said, okay. So he said, but I don't have any problem tracking. He says, so I said, okay, show me. So In the morning, and the one morning I come down, he has it on the sun, go back in the afternoon. This thing was tracking the sun for 6 hours. The feed horn shadow was dead center in the dish. I said, you readjusted it? He goes, no, it was running all day. I said, man, that is over the top. So this is his mom, Linda, and it was just a beautiful shot to throw in there with him and his prize dish. So now Eric becomes a senior. You go to the next slide. I'm sorry, we're going to the Green Bank. Yes, the Green Bank has to know this story. So in the summer of 2003, we have still some of the old timers here, and I think you remember Eric, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he comes down here to do his presentation, and he was really impressed with the hospitality of the SARA members, and really talking to the members got excited about some of the projects and stuff that they were working on. But at the end of the conference, Sue Ann Ederle gave him a ride up on the GBT, and that like took him over the top. That's, if anything to talk about, not even the science fair projects or anything. That was the climax of the trip to Green Bank, and also we gave him a one-year membership. So now we get to the senior. Geez, he's presenting at here he is presenting down at Green Bank. Do you recognize him? Do you still remember him? Yeah. Great kid. Next slide. All right. So now Eric's thinking big. He wants to look at the hydrogen line. So I need a bigger dish, Mr. Smith. So I know a guy who might be able to help us out. His name was Bob Nicely, and he was a commercial dish installation guy. And he was taking down dishes from commercial radio stations. And he had 2.5 Scientific Atlanta 4.5 meter dishes, what he called his graveyard, his dish graveyard. And if you went to this place, big property, and off to the side, so his wife couldn't see it, he had a collection of all these dishes. In fact, I bought several from him. So when he found out about Eric's project, he said, you know, I've been wanting to get these dishes out of my area for a long time. So he gives him a whole shooting match for $200. So he drags all these components home, and he builds the 4.5 meter, this time Meridian Transit, much simpler, and he's doing spectral work. He got a spectrocyber, and he did spectral work on the Sagittarius. And believe it or not, it only gained third place in the science fair that he entered again. But the knowledge he gained from a radio telescope of the caliber, and the knowledge he gained from doing the project, as he would say, was priceless. Next slide. So here is his beautiful 4.5 meter dish. Notice the concrete counterweight. Now, last I remember talking to him, I think these things were about 700 pounds. And he and his dad, when he put the dish in stow position, they had the casting up there in the elevation forks that were supporting it, and they poured this. They find out that they didn't quite calculate correctly the counterweight, that they needed more. So I don't know if you can differentiate. There's these slabs of concrete that they had to add on to the back side of it. And then it balanced very, very nicely. Much bigger motor this time to drive it. So Meridian Transit, and he does spectral work on the Sagittarius. Next slide. So it's off to college with Eric, and he breaks down the 4.5 meter dish, throws it in with the rest of the components in the barn. He had a big family barn. And as it says up there, you know, Eric's dad, Amos, says, so what are we going to do with all this stuff we got now? He said, well, I know Mr. Smith's going to want this someday. Yeah, I was afraid he would say that. So this is 2005, and Eric goes off to college and gets a mechanical engineering degree, later gets his master's, and into the storage it went. Go ahead. So now I'm going to fast forward to 2017. word was getting out that I was going to retire, and I had a chat with a gentleman by the name of Don Haig. Don Haig is a retired software engineer from Becton Dickinson, where I worked, and but still did contract work for Becton Dickinson. And one day he saw me in the break room, and he said, "What are you going to do with all your spare time?" I said, "Well, I have a student that I mentored, and I hope he still has the dish antenna that he put up at home, and I'm going to acquire it, and we're going to put a meridian transit antenna back at our observatory." He goes, "Wow, that's pretty cool. Tell me more about that." So I did. So he tells me about the York College Engineering Capstone Program. And I said, "Wow, that sounds pretty cool." He said, "Okay, now let me throw this at you. How would you like the dish to be fully steerable, fully trackable, and be web-based that you can remotely control it and download your data and things of that sort? How in the world are we going to do that?" He says, "Let's see if we can sell it to the staff at your college." He says, "I think this is going to make an incredible capstone project." So he does. So he comes back and says, "Your college bought it." I go, "Okay, so now I got to sell it to the park, because since our observatory is in the park, I had to see the director and told her about the project." And she said, "Let me take it to my staff." They approved it. And so I said, "We're go." So obviously the astronomy club's going to approve it. Well, I take it to the astronomy club. They had a zillion questions. You know, well, how big is this thing? And how's your college? Who's going to fund it? And this, that, and the other thing. And whoa. It's, okay, they're all valid questions. So after we, collaborated and I got more answers and stuff, and they said, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." So we did. And so we start off. So the capstone project didn't start in 2018 because this was 2017, and so we already had a project lined up. And they said, so Professor Haig told me summer of 2018 is when we're going to start. So my colleagues and friends at work took up a collection for me and raised $1,250 as seed money to start the project. And because the the astronomy club is a nonprofit, BD, my employer, matched it. So which was very nice. And then behind my back, my mechanical counterpart at work, very good 3D printer, and I'm hoping this is the next picture. Notice, I'm sorry, gang. No, it's fine. When we had to find out if Eric still had the components, and he did. And everything was in the barn, everything was intact. And so I said, "Yeah, we can do the project. We have all the material. Go ahead." And this is where I was explaining where we got the money. And this became the seed money. So the next picture should be, there's the neat little 3D radio telescope that they made for me. Then Rick said, "Well, look on the bottom." And it was for the 17 years of service. I said, "You couldn't have asked for a better gift than that." And then I think the next one are actually the checks that where they presented this to me when I sent off, and big cardboard checks. So, next slide. All right, so it's 2018, and the computer science students were selected, and by the summer session, we were in the classroom going over how in the world do we build a radio telescope, and the students are asking, what in the world's radio astronomy, how does that work? And Dr. Drew and Professor Haig, they were spinning these guys up, and I was trying to spin these guys up, and man, they're just like tearing at it. So, you saw their presentation, and I mean, I was just amazed at the amount of energy and passion these guys were throwing into this project. So now my work began. So my responsibilities were, to interface with these students, and also I had to do a layout. And now we're going to have to get a building permit because we're going to put a control room in. And well, you're going to have to go to the township. You're going to get a permit. Well, that became an absolute nightmare. So I had already selected the control room by a local builder. The control room was done, but the township was hanging us up on the permit. Well, while they were working on that, I had to also work with the parks, the maintenance people to help us out to get a pad laid for the room and just incredible support. And oh, by the way, we have to have electric from the main building to the control room. So I was in charge of contacting a contractor, electrical contractor, and then also had to arrange inspections with the county inspector to do the electrical work inspection. Let's go to the next slide. Go another one. Okay. Wow. So we're ready to go ahead and switch to yours. All the people that were helping us on it. In fact, I didn't really have up there. Carl Lister was a resource for the Spectra Cyber, and also I wanted. Not only did Eric donate the 4.5 meter dish, he also donated all of his receiving equipment, the LNA and the Spectra Cyber and the feed horn and things of that sort. So Eric is off doing well. I apologize. I had a slew of slides that was a chronology of the. I had some nice candid shots. Well, we can do that in the Drake Lounge. So. I'm going to turn it over to Todd Allery. Todd has made a major contribution to the project in the way of the software engineers and software computer sciences team. He is a member of our astronomy club. He wants me to call him my partner in crime. Very knowledgeable guy. He's been a member. Our club formed in 1989, and you joined the next year. So. Todd has essentially been there the whole time.
Yeah, regarding your issue with your building permit?
Yes, thank you.
I've gone through several of those iterations. First is you can build smaller buildings. And sometimes there's a maximum square footage you can put up without a building permit.
Well, I hate even to say this, but the park, the superintendent, the maintenance superintendent, he was having some medical issues, and he said, if I would have known you were putting in an 8 by 10 foot shed, called the control room, he said, we would have just done it. You didn't have to. So the thing is, and thanks for bringing it up, Bob, we did get the permit, but the parks took it over. It became their permit. And once they got on board, they got it through. It's knowing the right people. And Barry Myers, who's the superintendent, he says, I know how to get this pushed through, so don't worry about it. It's going to become our issue.
Yep. Two other suggestions for anybody that I've been through this. The other thing that some friends of mine got away with is getting a trailer, parking it, and if you pull it away maybe 10% of the time, then it's really a trailer. You can't park it permanently, but if you move it back and forth. And of course, the third obvious thing is sometimes a lot cheaper than going through a permanent building is simply remote control the whole thing.
I really apologize. I got
probably thought of all that
I got
stuff.
switched. Well, yeah, I got well, not the trailer. The park probably would have sold. I couldn't have sold that to the park. But
That would not have happened.
that would have not happened. So please join me in the Drake Lounge tonight, because I wanted to show you a bunch of pictures that I know what happened. The files got switched. So Todd's going to take over and he'll do his thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I've enjoyed this project. When Kerry invited me a year and a half ago to participate in the program, I had been a little bit interested in radio astronomy, but not really enough to do anything about it. But when he started describing the project, I was hooked. I have over 20 years of software engineering experience. It's huge in the community outreach. For 30 years, we've been doing community outreach for the club. Since 2007, I've run a planetarium for the public, for the club. A webmaster, correspondence secretary, a bunch of other stuff, but we get the club work done. And this project is, every time I tell somebody at work or meeting on the street, they're thrilled by what the possibilities are. And the software is just a lot of entertainment for me. So we're gonna have a great time. We had 14 software engineers last year. They were excellent. They were very enthusiastic. They worked a lot harder than 3 credits worth of work. We estimated they put 10,000 hours of time into developing the software. Okay, and it's very impressive. We still have quite a bit more software to write, and we'll get started again on software this September. As Carrie mentioned, the park is also thrilled with this project because it brings attention to the park in a positive way. Nobody's going to miss this radio telescope sitting out in the green field. They will ask questions and know that the park is hosting this. And of course, the college is gaining from it, our club is gaining from it, and we hope the public also will gain from it. The thing I want to tell you now, though, is you can participate too. When the college finishes with the hardware and the software, it becomes the club's. We control it at that point, own it. We want other communities to also put up radio telescopes, work with their local college, whatever it takes to boost STEAM education, because we all got into this hobby one way or the other, something to interest us and put us on a path to this career. We want more people in STEAM occupations. And if we can influence a few kids a year to take on STEAM education or careers, that's a win for us. Yes?
I'm familiar with STEM, but what is the A in STEAM?
Arts.
Arts. Not astronomy.
No. And why shouldn't it be? No, but in this, as it was mentioned this morning, we have the virtual reality and the augmented reality.
Yeah, okay.
So, talk a little more about that later on. So, we sign people up on our website, give them a guest membership to our website. They get 5 hours of observing time on our telescope schedule. Okay? When they finish with those 5 hours of observation, they get another 5 hours. Okay? We just don't want them to fill in the calendar. Okay? But we want them to use it. It's a nice way for them to do it. It's a simple interface that's being developed. I saw some nice things yesterday that, ooh, I'd like to have that. So the software engineers will have more work to do this summer or this fall. But they make a reservation for the telescope time, do their observations, and when it finishes, they get an email back and tells them that their work has been completed. Click to see the results. The results tell them what we see in their observation. Maybe there's an airplane that went through. Maybe you shouldn't have done a drift scan over the Crab Nebula. If there's other observations that have been done on the same object, we'll have links to those, and they can go look at other people's observations of the Crab Nebula. And then go to WikiLeaks to tell them more about the background, try to get them to come back and make an improvement on their observation. Learn something about what they observed is one of our goals. So you saw this earlier. It's a big telescope. We expect first light this spring of 2020. When the telescope is finished, in September of 2021, they start work on a second telescope. When that telescope's finished, if we've raised enough money, maybe we'll do a third. Okay. So we have long-term goals. We would like to get the first telescope working first. then we'll have something. This is the group from last year that did a tremendous amount of work. You you couldn't find a slacker anywhere in the group. They were willing to put in the extra hours. I would offer on weekends to come in and help the software engineers. Those who write software and have met college graduate software engineers, you know what they can do. Well, we try to avoid those mistakes in our project as well. It's a learning curve, and it's just a matter of experience. The team is not really diverse, but next year's team is more diverse. So that'll be nice. We have a lot more women involved in the program. And you saw earlier, this is the prototype on the shelf, where the control room software actually moved the telescope around and controlled it. And you saw that in the movie earlier. So the software is, there's a lot of it. Just to control the telescope, we have a database on the cloud and locally, so that if the internet goes out, we can still control the telescope, still do the scheduling. We have software that's going to make sure the telescope is safe, monitor its health, monitor its position, monitor the weather, and if something is happening, it will stow the telescope or do whatever is appropriate for that incident. We also will have software that's being written for a phone app, so that Carrie and I and then other admins can receive push notifications if the telescope needs our attention. We'll have video cameras set up. We will be able to look and see what the telescope is doing at that moment through the phone app. The phone app will also be able to interrupt any current observation and manually control it. So we could take over the telescope from our phones if we need to. Doesn't matter where we are, we'll be able to see what the telescope's doing and change it. We can even do a snow dump if we had to, just because we see there's too much snow there. So the other thing about this software is it really doesn't care what kind of telescope it is. The same software that controls the physical telescope will also control a virtual reality telescope or a small model telescope, which we have. I don't have it here. It doesn't really matter what kind of telescope. If you want to move it 30 degrees, the software takes care of that. That's meant for that telescope. And the control software just sends information to that component to make the motion. So we also create software so it does handle multiple telescopes. If in the future you do choose to join us, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We'll share the software with you if you're doing public outreach. Okay? So you don't have to invent scheduling software, you don't have to invent how to control the telescope. We want to get you moving forward. If you're working with a college, we'd like you to have that college add to the software that we're creating. So, we think that will help more communities win from this as well. I mentioned the phone apps. There's other things that we'll be doing with the AR and the VR. I've been telling the software engineers what I would like it to do, and they just kind of glaze over like we don't have that much time before graduation. But I'd like to have the VR where you can walk around the telescope. I want you to also be able to look up at the sky and see what we've measured already. So link into our database, and you see objects that we've measured in the sky. And then you can select the object and go through the times that we've observed that object and see the results that we've had from it. A nice visualization for that. It's all part of our public outreach. So that when we have visitors to the observatory, we can do that. Part of the reason we can do that is last month we received a grant from my company. UPS gave us $9,500 to buy hardware, educational outreach hardware for the telescope, which includes a HoloLens 2, a Vive Pro, a laptop to control it. So it's a nice gift. When I told my coworkers and the committee about this, they were writing the check. We originally asked for $6,500. They said, you want 95? Yeah. So that's one of the things about this project. We want to do it for community outreach, but we also want to help you do community outreach. If you want to think about it, I have business cards. You can approach me and I'll give you a business card later on, and we can talk more about it. But I'll take questions if you have any. Okay. Yes?
Have you been following the ASCOM spec that they use for controlling telescopes?
No.
Under the windows?
Just news to me.
Okay. Yeah. Because there's a lot of back-end software that uses this ASCOM spec. So all you have to do is write a driver to control your scope. Then the software will do the scheduling or moving the scope around for you.
Right, but we want to have more control over the environment than just that. We want to pay attention to the locks on the gates. We want to pay attention to the wind.
Yeah, that all goes into your driver. And then the back-end software, there's a lot of various programs out there very well written. And they just simply say, have you got a driver for this scope? Yes, load that driver and it'll control your scope for you. So it saves a lot of work.
Okay.
And then you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So you might want to look into that.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yep.
Other questions? Yes?
What languages are the kids programming in?
Question is, what language are the kids programming in?
I assume multiples.
Yeah. The control room is C#. The web page, web interface is other languages that are similar to Java but not Java. That's one of the things that's helped me is at my workplace, it's C# period with a little bit of, maybe a little bit of VB from legacy applications. The kids have been teaching me all kinds of new programming languages, but it's just another language. Still just programming.
What's your back-end database again, or is it just?
We're using Amazon Web Services.
Okay.
SQL Server, the SQL Server.
Yeah, they're free version. we didn't need the $400 a month version.
Shit. I know that was the free version too until I moved out.
Well, we don't think that we're going to have that much data flowing up to this cloud every day.
How are you managing delivering the results? Like if I schedule an observation on your device, do I get a shits file or something out of it, or what do I get?
You will get an email telling you about your results being ready. You can download it either as a FITS file, CSV, whatever option you choose. And you can also download other people's results. All right, well, thank you very much.
I think we're going on break next.
I do.
We're doing it this year. I should be next based on time. I think there is a presentation.
I think that I do.
A couple ideas here that I can dream of doing this robotic telescope, right? And I think it'd be cool to have a model of a telescope nearby, so you're trying to grant all the moves, but a real guy out in the field is doing something else. They needed someone to see something.
did like to access to as far as
or but those are scenarios that you need to simulate so that generally
Several universities and courses. Because it kind of explains intuitively so that's what I had to do.
How much of that equipment in the room is
That's gonna put his right there.
It's gonna bring it out.
That's all over the app.
Yeah, if you really want to get that, then you can't.
Another cable that has other stuff. Other lightning connectors. USB signals, which is so I've had to come up with different
Did you ever read his book, A Year or Two? It's more, it's like a journal, and I love it.
Oh, he's fantastic.
Yeah, so Terry sent around a mail message. There's grant money available to do X, Y, and Z. The grant had the application had 2 weeks. There's no way we're going to do this. Let me thinking, well, we have a list. We have a list to put some, we have a shopping list.
Put it on a slideshow now, so on the track.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but almost up to power.
The pressure is
And then I can drink. So it's good because every time I do this, I have to stop. So it's got to stop. And I send it and stop.
Oh, God. Can you blink?
That was impressive about the
Well, when you said that,
Thank you.
I said, oh my God, I already know what else I did. This is live.
Go through that.
So other guys that
Well, thank you, sir. This is a fun one.
Reality is so even though
How do I do something useful before the data?
we need a way of telling for more that switch.
I didn't move back to where it was engaging in this. You do have to see that. I'm not sure how to do that. You need a couple of electricals. That's the biggest, obviously, that's my biggest worry about this scope is that something go wrong electrically and transfers in either direction. That's my biggest concern. It's not going to blow down. It's built. This thing is built to withstand.
If there's a hurricane coming through,
A really big hurricane,
we'll
sure.
probably know about it.
Yeah, but a really big enough hurricane, sure, it's possible. I think 30 years from now.
Even if it's a hurricane that is stowed or all stuff, he's going to fly up there with 90.
But I also don't worry. And I'm just going to tell you this, I don't want this to turn into you go run the table if you won't run it. But I don't think it's going to be done enough at the end of this coming summer. Let's start on it. Yeah. I just want to throw that out. I think it'll be up and it'll be working, but it won't be done enough to be safe. That's my personal opinion.
I don't know if you can raise the like 30 to 40 range.
And it might get on the horizon.
I think that there might be some.
Certainly, there's plenty of old cars. Greater, short area. Probably checkers. Pretty good things. Shipley's. Lots of
Hopefully, very much what we're doing.
I don't know. That's a no question.
So like, you know, so there's the pin, and then switch stops, and then the actual part stops. So we have that, so like another, rather than just be like a little point, come on, so it's kind of like a curved beam, so it can take more impact, rather than just
Yeah.
It's a switch in there. As you were saying.
I just grabbed the power.
I want some.
I made some corrections.
Goes out.
What's in the phone?
Nothing's happened.
We don't love this presentation. Okay, so. Actually, very good. This is. If I go to the next part.
That's how I'm just going here.
I'm allowed to go that way. Yeah, that's right. Guaranteed. I'm not going to be sure.
Well, we can't do that here. That stops. That stops.
Your all sensor, your magnetic sensor. So if I get over here and do this, you trigger your all sensor, I can turn it on. You already have the hardware there. Just put it on.
All right, you set up? That's good. Here's the HDMI.
We only talk here.
Or do you need the
Great deal. $6.
Here's the.
It's just two. Bargain with
There's this connection and there's the HDMI. Can't get one of those.
If that's fine, it's fine, I can get a hold of it. But yeah, he's still also in the area. I mean, he's happy with
These guys, the whips, address, where I work, I retired earlier this year. Giant reindeer,
Presentations. This is what you get the kids to do, because I'm trying to figure out how do you use the data after you get it. That's the fun part, as opposed to, because you've collected all sorts of data, and then it sort of gets lost because nobody knows what to do with it.
As I've told our software developers, in May, the software developers from the previous year who were graduating met with us. Met with us and the kids coming in this fall to explain and answer questions from them, because we were telling them this is a 3-credit course, but you're not doing 3 credits worth of work, you're doing 9 credits worth of work.
That's right.
And if you are not interested in doing this, you should change classes. But the alumni kids explained to the new ones how well prepared they were for job interviews by doing this agile development with teams, multidisciplinary teams. They were so well suited.
Good. So I come from defense industry.
Oh, no, I have, he's got extended stuff. Totally. So this is,
I'll tell you one second. No, it should, he's got it. So, thank you. We find so few, even senior engineers have had practical experience. You can sit there and say, the first thing you ask in a job interview is, what are you most proud of from an engineer? And what I find out is an engineer, if he's done his best, I don't care how raw he is or new he is, will brag about his favorite project. And you can't stop him from bragging. And that's how you know he's a good engineer. And so I always have a problem with it if I get an engineer coming in and he won't tell me what he did, because you go, he's not proud of it. You know,
He didn't solve anything.
He's either hiding something he knows broken, which is usually the case, because a good engineer will brag. And even if he's, a young engineer will brag even if he was wrong, because they know he's wrong. And then at least you can sit there and say, okay, here's what you need to fix and stuff like that. But he's doggone.
Still enthusiastic.
Engineer loves to talk about it when he does, right? And if he doesn't talk, there's something wrong. So this gives him that, what did you do that you're proud of? And boom, you can't shut the guy up, and they're gonna hire him because of that.
Well, we, before the kids escaped last May, we got them to tell us 3 things that they liked about this year-long project, and we put it up on the website that we're using so that we can acknowledge their work in our project.
Here's the other thing that would help them. They need to make a portfolio of pictures, of programs they've built, and they need to take that to their job interview. I mean, my daughter, I learned it's my daughter, she does fine arts, so she has I mean, that's a portfolio. But an engineer needs a portfolio. He needs to bring in the pictures of him in front of the dish. Here's the software code I developed. Here's the other things I was involved in. He walks in with that thing, and he's got a job. But normally they just come in raw, with nothing in their hand, and they just got the resume to go. But that thing, when they show those things and they start showing pictures.
My oldest daughter is an architect, and she had to go through all of that as well for building a portfolio. But they're used to doing it. That's what they do each year, each semester. Is here's 2 projects for your portfolio. Well, what did you say about your employer?
The best employer I ever had. Anyway. Now this is our group. It's just like sort of your group.
You have more money.
No, we don't. Oh no, we have no money. If I had a grant like that, it might be. Most of the stuff is out of your pocket.
I'm just gonna climb over.
No, since they didn't leave a marker.
That's our control.
Nice camper. Is it?
It's an old Noah van.
Is it? Oh, okay. Is it solar powered?
Was. Actually, Skip helped us get some real power to it. So.
Okay.
This year is the first year in 15 years they owned it that we've got real power. Otherwise, we're on a generator. Generator moved the dish with solar powered and railroad batteries. That's how we ran it for up to this year. They wouldn't let me keep a laptop running. Well, one laptop I was allowed to keep running full time over the winter to collect data. But I could not have a tower because I didn't have enough power. They didn't have enough solar power to power a tower. Just a laptop. That's where we were at.
That's ingenuity.
That's it.
Line the dish with solar cells.
There you go. No, put a solar panel right there.
See right there? That has been melted a couple times.
Yeah.
And that used to have in fact, that one there has been replaced because one is we had it was called a bomb cyclone, a winter cyclone. They came over and it broke that piece off. But before that, we had melted, someone had left it too aimed at the sun, and we melted the plastic cap off that. Yeah, that thing is a great solar reflector to that point.
Pretty close, yep.
We used to have to paint our dishes with the scatter.
Oh, yeah. That makes, no, I don't think that's
Any dishes you're capable of melting something that's smooth finish aluminum.
As we got up to 12, 14 acres, all 5 dishes.
So when you took that thing down to replace it, how far off the ground is that?
right back here is the tower. You turn it, I'll get some pictures of it, but that's a tower. We basically move this thing around to that position, and that sits right on the tower. And the guys stand up there and they can do everything right there with them. It's about 30 feet up now. Yeah,
One is lined up right here.
The Sarah West guys got up here. And,
It was great.
yeah, so Adrian.
It was great.
That's why I brought it along. I know it's sorry, I'm speaking along.
Yeah.
We got lots of badger holes this year, so we got badgers out there. Big giant holes, it's always right in our dirt roadway we got. So, anyway, we ready?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, Richard Russell, I got two, I'm from Deep Space Exploration Society, so we're a nonprofit. The claim to fame was that we got this donated to us. It's a 60-foot dish, used to be tropospheric antenna. They're used by the Army to figure out propagation paths. And they used to also have a 500-foot tower. Not since I've been there, but they used to have a 500-foot tower that was later demoed. This is where we're at. Actually, Haswell, Colorado. So if you take Colorado Springs and Pueblo and Colorado and go east, about halfway between the two, 120 miles, that's where we're at. It's a nice open area, pretty good RFI zone. This is that was the 500-foot tower. This is actually how we got it. The government sold it. I think they sold it to the Kushner family for $10,000. That was 15 acres and the dish. And there's a bunker, 20-foot bunker underneath, and we added the comm trailer after the fact. And we also added a propane generator. So until about a year ago, we were on propane and solar power. And we learned a lot about propane. If somebody saw our presentations 2 years ago at the Western Conference, the guys came back and explained how they calculated all the solar power and everything for this thing to run that dish. We had to use the propane generator to run the dish, but we also had a 5 kilowatt, standing generator to run that dish. So it's not very, it doesn't take a lot of power to run the dish. And this dish is also tied to the ones you guys saw in Boulder. When you guys toured the two dishes out there, this was also part of that system. About 400 to 2 gigahertz, it's a 60-foot dish, about 42.5 dB. Our biggest thing is right now we've got a 1420 megahertz feed on there, and our biggest issue really is we got a 0.8 degree beam width. So our pointing accuracy is almost too precise, for our encoders and everything like that. And every time you stop this thing, so you're sitting there and there's a lot of metal there to stop it at 0.8 degrees. So then we just started pulsar work. So pulsar work is trying to keep that pulsar in at 0.8 degree beam is our new challenge. But again, here's the tower that we go up to replace the feed. Right here, that's it in stow position. You say we're right out in the middle of nowhere here. Haswell is about 5 miles to the north. I've actually gone through there 10 times, and I've never seen an actual person outside. That's how we're at.
How many rattlesnakes have you seen?
Actually, no, there was a rattlesnake. We did have a rattlesnake in the bunker the other day, not a month ago. And I think there's about 3 rattlesnakes. 3 confirmed rattlesnakes, and a lot of fake ones. People, I must have been a rattlesnake. But, not too bad. Not too bad. I just mowed out there, didn't see a single snake. So, let's see, here's part of our solar power arrangement. We also have a full ham radio station. The club is a bunch of EME, extra class ham radio guys, and then radio engineers from all the radio stations who decided they want to go do radio astronomy, but didn't know anything about the radio astronomy, but they knew everything about everything else. Right? So when you get in there, there's all sorts of cool stuff if you were a radio engineer. And then you try to get these guys, let's go look at Cass A, and they go, huh?
what's Cat A, right? And here's right ascension declination, they no clue, okay? So a lot of, they want to learn. It's just that they keep going into infrastructure projects. So that was our generator shack, which we've actually dismantled, we've turned down now because we got power in. And electrical power, finally. And
Not going to show the picture of the other small building you have? It works very well. I tried it out.
okay. No, actually, I'm not sure I got that picture.
I think I might.
Did you have it? All right, well, okay. We just, because we couldn't have women come there because there was no head there. I mean, that's a Navy term for bathroom guys. So, and so we finally got one, right? And it's a nice thing, and so now we're inviting everybody, right? So, and these guys are so impressed, they bring it up in a meeting that's YouTube around the years, right? So thank you guys. This used to be our multi-beam and feed. We took that down and put a 1420 in there. So, and then we also have some feed controls and stuff. So, let's see, this is our inside of this here. We've got controls up here. I can ASL manually. We electronically bring down the position down here. All the SETI work is here, and this is really Skip's office back here, where he does all his stuff when he's there. And I think what else? That little camera there is our lead electrical engineer's granddaughter's, and that's how we used to remotely monitor the power levels of our batteries. So that camera looked at that meter there, and we'd log in and then look at the camera. So that's the advancement we were doing with a little Wi-Fi connector. We had no Wi-Fi. We had one cell phone tower. That was the extent of our communications capability. This is what the bunker is, and that's what it normally looked like. And that's what we had to do every time we went out there. We had to go clean out the bunker with tumbleweeds. All right, because it's out in the wilderness. Since then, we put up a wall here. We put chain link fence around here, which is keeping a lot of these tumbleweeds out. We haven't had as much trouble. This is the inside of the bunker. So I'm saying this is 20 feet down. Used to hold Army, about 6 to 10 Army people that used to be in the, that's who used to work there. So this year we got tool supply, we got a little bunk room in the back, we got a toilet shower back here. We're actually going to have a hot water heater pretty soon. So you guys come out, we'll have hot water showers. And we got some cooking stuff here, microwaves and things like that. So it's, you know, home away from home. Takes me 2 hours to get there. This is our, my daughter designed this. The guy who took this picture by Milky Way, this is during one of the meteor showers. So you've got a meteor. This guy couldn't even put his thing here. Actually, we found this on his website. He snuck on the property, taking the picture. So we said, okay, if you give us rights to the picture so we can put it on our QSL card, then we'll make you the official photographer of the club, and that's what he did. So, you know, that's the kind of bribes we make. I mean, so he's been taking lots of good pictures.
What are the lights? Huh? What are the yellow lights down there?
Okay, so that's Colorado Springs, Pueblo, La Junta, I think.
Yeah.
Right, and right about here is Cheyenne Mountain. Cheyenne Mountain has a bunch of the TV and radio station antennas in Colorado Springs. So that, pointing in that direction is problematic in terms of RFI, if I'm pointing directly at it. This is what our capstone project was for a new member was that this used to be disassembled. This is a spiral staircase. There's only 2 ways to enter this bunker. One is through that one area. You notice if it snows overnight, you may not be able to open that door. So there's a hatch right through here and a little shed on top, but there was no stairs. So these guys found this spiral staircase, and the capstone of you're going to join the club is you need to put that together. And that was my first job, and I decided to go do radio astronomy instead. So finally got 2 guys to put that together, so we now got a way out in case of snow. Then we put balls together. This is our
dish positioning system. So we now can read the encoders. So it's saying that's our current 1420 feed. A couple of upgrades. That's our power upgrade we got. And this is our new pulsar system. This is the N210 SDR. And here we're sitting there manually trying to get that dish to point at a pulsar and track it for 20 minutes, and it was not successful. So and even though we got tons of gain up there, right now we got a pointing problem. So we're trying to get our pointing to be automatic right now. So that's the new project. Sounds easy, but it's not with this system. Okay, because we were trying to do pulsars, I went into a learning curve mode because I didn't know much about pulsars. And the first thing I realized was that the Pioneer spacecraft, I'm an spacecraft design and ground system design engineer. So the Pioneer spacecraft actually put a pulsar map up for the ET guys to go find, and then come back and conquer us because they got a great map of where we are at. So I decided, okay, if I go decipher this thing like I'm sitting out in space and I find my Pioneer spacecraft, I think there's a Star Trek thing about this, can I find my way back to Earth? So I went ahead and tried to figure out how to decipher it, and some people have tried it. So the Pioneer and Voyager spacecraft both put out the same pulsar map. One had two figures in it and one didn't. One was a gold disc. The Voyager ones were gold disc. So first thing I'm going to do is trying to figure out, can I interpret the picture and can I decipher that to figure out what pulsars are available, and can I triangulate back to where the sun or the Earth is? The next thing is, if I go find an extraterrestrial planet, like one of the Kepler planets that they found, can I navigate to the Earth from that planet using the pulsar map as my guide? So that's what this paper's about. And it gives it walks you through all the parameters a pulsar provides you, and then it gives you some of the galactic navigation. My background is a submarine navigator, so all of my papers are, I need to figure out something to do with pulsars or hydrogen. I need to do, well, what can I do with the paper, with the data to actually make it work? Now, I'm very glad I put little spots on there because this is YouTube, right? We've been censored because these guys are not clothed here during this thing. But this is the Pioneer pulsar map, and I'll go through each of the things. This is the depiction of the hydrogen flip. All right, this is where the sun is supposed to be, and each of these lines depict us as galactic center, and each of these lines depict the angle, and the dashes here are binary for fundamentally you turn them into pulse period. Okay, neutral hydrogen. Based on that number, the thought is that an ET would recognize this as a hydrogen flip. Okay? In which case he would know this number. Okay? So that was that's clue number one, that is one of the key numbers. Okay, clue number two. These are the pulsar lines. So there's 14 pulsars arranged around here, right? And I labeled them 1 to 14. I'm not sure if that was the way they were supposed to be labeled. That's just how I did it. The sun's location center, there's an angle between each one of these, and there's a length on each one of these things. And there's a length here to the galactic center. Those are all supposed to be relative to each other. So the ratios are supposed to be the same. The lengths are supposed to be the same. Ratios. Yeah.
How do you know that the lines radiating out from the sun's location are going to pulsars? Or how does the ET do that?
I don't know yet. I'm almost there. See, this is the problem. I mean, you don't right now. You don't know that they're pulsars. You just know there's a bunch of data here, and in fact, I've got somebody else's review that figured out I had to find a couple references that told me that they were pulsars, right? But, exactly, but that's the key.
Yeah.
So they have to sit there and walk through all these things and come up with that that's a hydrogen, and this is a pulsar line, and then I have to go combine data to make the answer come out, right? So, and I'm, knowing what I'm doing now, it's still complicated. And I know they're pulsars. Okay, so, you stole all my thunder there, so. All right, so, let's see, did I get a lot? Got all, so the galactic center, that's key there. Okay, so let's take a look at this. There are, on any one line, this is a binary count, that's the least significant bit, of, dashes and dots. All right? So they need to know binary. And they need to know a dash is a 1 and or a dash is a 0 and a line is a 1. Okay? They need to know that that line there is the relative length above the galactic center. Because that's not part of this binary list. This is the z-axis. And in fact, these were so tight here, I didn't even use the z-axis numbers. So the pulsar is that relative distance from the galactic center. And then I start my binary here, which is the count of how many hyperfine counts of the hydrogen it is. Right? So this is a number that I multiply times the hydrogen thing, right? And actually went over that, but yeah, that will give me the period. And then this is the relative length, actually between here and, if it's separated out, it's the relative length, that's the relative length of the pulsar distance compared to the galactic distance from us that the pulsar is at. So they can measure it, and then they can, from length and angle, and then figure out the distance we're at. Okay? Everybody sort of see where that's at? So that length there is the distance length compared to the galactic length. And then that is the distance to the above the galactic center. And that is the pulsar count.
Your side was the little tick mark right near the arrow there. Yeah,
there.
That
is the distance above the z-axis on the galactic length. Now, how do you know that from scratch? I didn't. I mean, this is all research that I got. Okay. So ET is still behind the curve here.
Yeah, it's an intergalactic scavenger hunt.
That's right.
We're all in.
So who put this together? Is this Carl Sagan?
Carl Sagan and Frank Drake. So, okay, so going through each one of these things, I did the numbers, the ones and zeros. Okay, so that's what those are for all 14 of them. And by the way, I put down which way I counted them. So, that was key, because part of this is which way do I start? Where's the bottom? Where's the top? Okay. Now, I've had a couple of professional astronomers tell me, now I'm going to do is I'm going to take that binary and change it to base 10. And they went, it doesn't matter. You're doing base 10 because you know base 10, not because the ET knows base 10, right? He can just be as good base 6 or base 8 or whatever he is. I said, well, okay, how would I know that I'm doing base 10? Well, I've got two hands there, right? And he's doing base 10. Of course, you could also do a base 2 or base 4, based on the number of arms, and so who knows?
Or base 11?
That's right. Oh, base 11, I don't know. Can't say that. All right. We're going to shift into the transition units. Okay, so that's equal to these numbers here. Okay? So they're called transition units. So I have to take those numbers, which is what those ones and zeros equal, and then I multiply that times 1 over the 1420 number. Okay? So you see that, and then that's what the 1 over looks like. Here's the period in seconds of those pulsars. Okay? So that's how they came up with to identify the pulsar in that map. I went to the ATNF database.
How do they know how long a second is? That's a arbitrary.
But that's straightforward. If
Relative number.
You have the hydrogen.
they know what the 1420 megahertz line was, in whatever units they put that in, then when they multiply times this thing, it comes out in their units.
Oh, okay.
All right, so that's the key, is that you don't have to know seconds. I'm using seconds, but if they're 15, 20, what epsilons or whatever, I forget what Skip, what's the name of your,
You mean 40 years?
for iridanes, right? I'm gonna call them, instead of seconds, they're now iridanes, right? And so if there was 15, 20 iridanes, then we could do this.
Yeah, they could also know by the relative, the deltas between the pulses of
Right.
the pulse. So they
Right.
don't even have to know 14, 20.
Right, it's just that that allows them to turn it into their units. I'm using seconds because it's 1420, 406 to me.
Yeah.
Right, so but that's how to do it. That's how they would do it.
It's a ratio.
Yeah, it's just a ratio. So that was actually pretty good that they can do that. Okay, so another bit of numbers, but this is what we came up with. This is the database, and the difference in period from this is the VisiR database. So, and here's the difference. So there is some difference, but it's really a lot of decimals back. The name of the pulsar, these would be PSR-Js, PSR-Bs. And the difference here is this is the 1950 Bezier numbers, is the Bs, and the Js are the Julians. When they shifted to the 2000, J2000 coordinate system, you start seeing the pulsars in the J names. So but most of the ones in the pulsar map are all named Bs because that's where the reason the Bezier system got. These are the current J numbers. Okay, so there we get that. So that's azimuth and elevation. Azimuth, elevation. These are more accurate current date locations. Right ascension declination in J2000s, the distance in kiloparsecs. Now parsec is about 3.1 light years. So kiloparsecs is 3,100 light years. And so realize how far away these guys are. It's not trivial numbers or little numbers. I converted those to galactic longitude and latitude. And then there's a thing called P dot. So the pulsar spins, but over time it starts spinning down. There's a braking effect because of the magnetic field. So there is a deceleration time. So that's called P dot. All right, and that's important because you need to know all these pulsars, if you see them 2 years from now, they will be slower by the P dot times 2 years. Now, if you happen to be 2 light years away, you're seeing it as it was younger, so it'll actually be 2 times P dot faster than what it actually is at the pulsar.
Yeah.
Because you're seeing it in the past. You're seeing it in the past, and the past is faster than the future, the current. Okay? So that's important with the P dot number, but fundamentally, they still map really nicely. Okay? Now, I'm going to show you these. 7 here is the worst case. 7 and 3 are worst case numbers that didn't quite match as well. But based on this thing, let's see. Oh, I'm calculating the base period of the pulsar. So the pulsars here, I'm way over here. We observed all these numbers are based on where the Earth, what we saw the period of these pulsars from the Earth's perspective. But the base period, what I'm calling it is, I'm tracking it back based on the distance to what the actual pulsar is doing current time, speed-wise, which should be slower than what we saw it as. Why do I need to know that? Because if I'm in a different location in the galaxy,
I'll be a different distance from the pulsar, and I need to know where the starting point is so I can figure out what they're going to see from their location. Okay, so that's the base period. That's all that is, the math to do that. I threw that in because a lot of people like to see the math, but it's not just good on the chart here. Okay, so then I convert everything to galactic coordinate system. X, Y, and Z. Z's up. X is perpendicular to the galactic center is Y, and the X is the perpendicular to Y, and then Z straight up. Okay, so these are where the galactic coordinates of all those 14 pulsars are. And so the next question is, how do I know even what, I got a bunch of pulsars in a picture. Am I using, is that the Z coordinates, the X coordinates, the Y coordinates? What is the coordinate system? So basically, this is the plot of those pulsars in galactic coordinates, and here's where the picture looks like. And so fundamentally, as I'm sitting there, figured out that this is basically an XY plot of the pulsars. Okay? From comparing that to that, and I know it's hard because these distances, these lines are not the distances, the distances are like these little lines. You can't tell because it really looks like that. So if this is really close to this, and if you actually, computerized all this and you were an ET and you were smart enough to do this, you might be able to figure out that this is the XY coordinate system that we actually plotted. Okay? All right, the next thing was the angles. Pretty strategic, huh? So the angles here are the next step. They gave us angles, and so I sat there and I measured the actual lengths of these lines, because they're supposed to be relative down here, and then the angles from this line over, and I measured those things manually off a picture. So if you actually had the real one, you'd be better off. So on the scaling, I basically came up with that in parsecs, there's so many parsecs per millimeter, and I got an average of 188 parsecs per millimeter, so it's not real good. So I can figure out the error. I got all these errors in distance from actuals. So really bad error ratios in distance. So from a distance point of view, this is a bad map. You wouldn't be able to find your way to Earth with this. Okay, then I went into the errors on angles, and angles are really close. So I got a really good at angles, and I'm going through this relatively quick, but you guys don't need to see the charts there. All right, so big picture is, here's where the area of uncertainty is if I take the pulsars and I backtrack the data, and I come up with this little sector here, which gives me about an area of uncertainty here between angles, okay? I realize 9,000 to 6,500, that's 2,500, that's 1,500 parsecs. So you probably aim a radio telescope in that direction, but I wouldn't start traveling yet. Okay, that's a lot of distance. But if you take a couple of the errors out, for example, 7 and 8 actually swapped positions since then. 7 used to be here, but 8 in reality, the real pulsar is over here now, and 7 is over here. So those swap positions, which gave you big errors, those are the 2 errors down here. If you take everything else, you're probably within, 1,000 parsecs of an error. Okay, so now I'm going to figure out, okay, if I'm at Kepler 452, which is a supermassive Earth-like planet, they think, and I plot its galactic position, can I find my way, if I'm an ET on Kepler? And so you go back to the numbers, you have to go figure out where your distance is from each of the pulsars to Kepler, and then you have to convert what their expected, what the period of the pulsar would look like from their position.
Okay? So their pulsar period would be different because they're in a different location in space, and the distances, they would see a different time frame of that pulsar. So the period would be different. So this actually calculates that, and this is what they would see from their observatory in order to do that. So, big picture is they're here, they'd be able to travel to the center of that area of uncertainty with in the XY plane and the XZ plane. That's what they'd have to do. Okay, just doing the geometry. Okay, so you did now traveled using that pulsar map to approximately where the Earth is. All right. So, in summary, what did we do? This was just an exercise in learning how all the pulsar parameters. So we hit all the different major pulsar parameters. We figured out the distance. Distance is calculated with dispersion measure, and so a lot of that came out. We found all the major databases. It's in line with all the SETI work we're doing. So we're looking at all the SETI planets, things. And I made a lot of assumptions. Can an ET look at this thing? Well, a human can barely look at this thing and come up with the logic to go through it. All right, and there's a lot of people who have attempted to do this before, figure out that thing, and seen a lot of people who couldn't figure it out. So that I believe is how they meant to do it, the order they did it. And this is perfect for an exercise in pulsars. If you can reproduce that map and do all these calculations, this is how you get your students and everybody interested in pulsars. Because that's a famous chart, and this is a cool exercise to have students do. And they'll love it. Okay? Okay, so this is tomorrow's pitch. It's even more boring than this one in terms of, in fact, I make people do sit-ups here pretty soon. But the problem with that pulsar map is pulsars are very highly directional beams. Those 14 pulsars may not be visible along that path of the planet. We can only see the pulsars that are aimed at us. Right? So my next presentation was I came up with a way to figure out if a pulsar anywhere in the galaxy can be seen somewhere else in the galaxy. So I applied that to the 14 pulsars, and lo and behold, 25%, this is it, if you're at Earth, all green, this is XYZ plane. So XY, YZ, or XZ, XYZ plane. So you have to, in order to see it, you have to have all greens. In other words, you have to be able to be seen in all different axes. So if I'm only 25% between here and Kepler, 452b, look at that. I only got 3 pulsars that are in view. The rest of them, one of the things are not in view of the plane. You get all the way to the end, I got 2. All right? And I need 3 to come up with the simultaneous equations to figure out where I'm at. So, if I'm in Kepler, one of the closest planets, at 400 something light years, I cannot use that map to find out where I'm at. Okay, because I can't see I don't know those other pulsars exist. Okay? The beam is not in my path. If I'm somewhere else in the sky, I might be able to see more pulsars, but the one I selected, I can't see them. So that's where my follow-on work is. How do you select pulsars, and don't count on that pulsar being available to you if you're somewhere else in the galaxy. Okay, well that's sort of my, that's my amateur astrophysicist session for the day. And so any questions?
Well,
so I didn't understand if ET will find a Pioneer spacecraft 100,000 years from now, the period of the pulsar would have changed.
That's right.
How would the ET figure out that the number has been 100,000 years ago?
Right.
Different.
First he would figure out that the pulsars there's a period there, and you know the P dot. So the braking effect is relatively constant, though there's some glitches and other things that happen, right? So you'd be able to figure out when the spacecraft was launched based on the periods that we put on the map there. That the assumption is that he's going to know that those pulsars are those pulsars, right? They're going to be close enough that he's going to be able to figure that out. And then based on tracking back in time, he'll be able to figure out 100,000 years ago, that's where those pulsars...
Yes, but he doesn't know how long the spacecraft has traveled.
That's right.
It may be 1 year, maybe 100,000
Right.
years. That's unknown.
Right.
For ET.
The best I can say is that you would apply you just need to backtrack based on the P dot, 100,000 years, and you can come up with which pulsars they are.
So the assumption is...
I'm sorry. You would know the current period, and then you figure out that that's 100,000 years since the period that's on the chart.
The assumption is the ET is going to identify the pulsar from the period.
Right.
The ET is going to observe the decay, the
Right.
spin down, and then work it backwards to figure out when
Yeah, that's it. He's going to have his current pulsar period will be 100,000 years
different,
decayed from the one that we've got on there. And he'll be able to come up and say, okay, that's when they launched it, because the period from their observation was this thing, and that's 100,000 years of spin down.
But I think you're going to have, if he knows the location of us, he'll be able to figure out, compensate for the light year differential from his place, so he has a reference from there, so he can figure out that, okay, that's the pulsars, and that would actually pinpoint our location.
Yeah, that'd be it. Yeah. The key is that if it's too far in the future and the spin down rate, assuming it was constant, is there another pulsar that would mask and look similar?
So again, a separate simultaneous equation based on our location in the galaxy versus his galaxy would pinpoint us precisely.
The key is that unless you know the pulsars, you don't know where that chart is right now. So there's a couple of things there. Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah.
He knows the time. What's the power source? A radioisotope. He does a simple...
Well, that's another one I'd throw in there. Yeah. He has another thing of time there.
Yeah.
And,
there is on the backside of one of the plaques, or it's either Pioneer or Voyager. I don't know which, but I think there's a sample of cesium.
Oh, there we go. That'd be a good point in time.
So, and then I believe on the front side they've given the reference to that, to whatever it is. I don't know. I don't know if it's cesium. But
Yeah, I didn't catch that when I was looking at it, but yeah, I wasn't. Yeah, that's good. That's another good point. They're saying they know that number, then they're pretty good. Now the chances of this thing going out, unless you're Beecher, you turned into Beecher or something like that, which is Star Trek, then this one will not be that far away. It'll never be 400 light years away, theoretically. If it is, then we're probably not going to be around, or we're not going to be around anyway. But okay, so
we will have moved.
We should have moved by then. Yeah. Anyway, this is a great project for applied people. Because it walks through all the dynamics. They know everything about pulsar parameters after this. Right? Questions? That's all I got. Thank you.
Well, next we have our illustrious Skip. So you want to do it from now? Okay, thank you. All right. Well, we're doing a very fun project. I'll just summarize it first and then go into details. But if there's anything that isn't clear, I'm going to try to go over this pretty quick. Just ask, and then I'll clear it up, hopefully, if there's something that isn't understandable. So we're doing a SETI project that I haven't heard of before, specifically in this kind of way.
I've been doing SETI for a very long time. I'm fairly well connected with the SETI community. And I haven't seen anybody quite try this before. We have the 40-foot dish here that most of you have seen and used at various times. And we have a 60-foot dish at the Deep Space Exploration Society in Azle, Colorado. Both of these are extremely low RFI sites. And I'm going to summarize first, then I'll go into details. We've got digital backends at each site. We have about 15 million channels that capture in a quarter second at 3.7 hertz bins, pulses. Okay. When they exceed a threshold, an SNR threshold, which is around 12 dB, it's a little complicated, but it's basically like 12 dB, the signal-to-noise ratio threshold, then each site saves that 0.26 second record to a file, to a separate file. The two computers do not talk to each other. Okay? I don't want them to corrupt each other with some kind of an event. Okay? The clocks on the Ubuntu computers are not synchronized intentionally, because I don't want a cron job to disrupt and cause things to happen at the same time at the same frequency. The oscillators are locked together with GPS signals with two separate GPS receivers at each site. They lock up the oven oscillators, which control the references, and also generate a time tick, which is used to synchronize the sample time of the digitizer. So the two digitizers operating one at each site are triggered by a tick that has about 9 nanoseconds RMS jitter set by the GPS satellites. Okay. So we capture those files. We run them without discussion. We have landline telephones at each site, but I just speak with Steve Plock at Haswell for the purposes of saying, is it scrolling at your site? Yeah, it's scrolling. How fast is it scrolling on your screen? It's scrolling this fast. Okay, it looks good. Okay, let's make sure the times agree. So the times get posted to the screen, and we match up at the beginning of each session that we do. We match up that the modified Julian date agrees in the output, which means it's also going to be correct in the file. Okay, the modified Julian date is taken in from the GPS clocks over the actual data path. So it's injected, that's it's a BCD sequence that's injected into the RF path. So the computers do not have any software delays associated with them because the data itself contains the timestamps for each site. So we save all of that, and then all of that goes back when we're done with our tests, which usually are about 40 hours for each session that we do. I go home to New Hampshire with the data that I've taken here with the digital backend, and I bring the digital backend with me. And Steve Plock sends me a file, either through Dropbox or USB or both, of the files that were captured at Haswell. Then I have additional software that I've written that takes every record for the Green Bank and looks for a Haswell and sees if there are any simultaneous pulses occurring. And the goal is to say, okay, if somebody wants to send us a communication signal, this isn't a search for continuous signals that are some sort of beacon that says, you know, if we send you something for the next minute, then maybe this is what you're supposed to use to say, look here, because look, there's something happening for a minute. I'm looking for straight communication signals. So I'm assuming that signals that are coming to us are already modulated, okay, and there's information contained in them, not continuous beacons. And part of the reason for that is because in all the years that I've spent looking for these continuous signals with long duration and long integration times, I track them down, I see them, they are there, but I take out my spectrometers and my antenna and start walking around and I find out it's something like a clock radio or something. So I've given up on the idea of using, of looking for continuous signals, and I'm only looking for straight, like Shannon efficiently modulated signals that contain information. Okay? So that's the thing. And the second thing I'd like to say is I don't care anymore about using single dishes for SETI. I've very much given up on that. You know, I've been giving talks here for like 3 or 4 years. It was only last year that it's my first talk where I'd given it up. And now I'm even further along down that road. And it's true for even follow-up. Because if you do follow-up and you start with a small dish like this, and you follow up with a big dish, I don't know exactly where in the beam of the big dish The small thing really is, which means I need a lot of time on a follow-up, because there could be an undiscovered red dwarf somewhere in that pattern. Okay, so that's a fair amount of the talk. So let me just go through the slides pretty quickly. So this is the problem with RFI. We've got so many possible ways today, especially with efficient communication systems, that we can confuse what we're seeing with RFI. And so that leads to the idea of the Fermi paradox, which is where are they? Why haven't we seen them yet? There's so many of them in the galaxy. Why have we not seen any of these signals? And maybe one of the reasons is because a lot of what we see, we think are probably RFI. Makes a lot of sense because there is a lot of RFI out there. So here's how it works. There's a dish at Haswell up here, and 1,257 miles away we have the dish at Greenback. Now this is a transit dish looking south, so it has no Doppler shift across. Haswell is coming up towards us, so it has a positive Doppler shift over here, which gets corrected for. And I've calculated that about 3 different ways, twice, and I haven't had anybody confirm that for me. And if anybody wants to do the math, drop all the perpendiculars and everything else and calculate the Doppler difference, for that I really appreciate it, just to make sure that number is right. That number, of course, is extremely important because it defines the difference in frequency between the two sites. Okay, that a simultaneous pulse would actually be present at. So again, so this is synchronized. I mentioned this number of channels. So 1405 to 1448 megahertz was for the first 135 hours. We ran at that system, and then I put an improved system on in April of this year. We've been running this since November of 2017. We did 135 hours. We did another 45 hours after April. And the frequency is now from 1395 to about 1455, with channels that are still 3.73 hertz bins. So the idea behind this is to take the beams and themselves, yes, they're going to cross over. The beams are going to cross over eventually because of the 0.8 degree beam width and the 1 degree beam width from the two antennas. And that turns out to be about a third of the distance to the moon, so roughly. But across the beams, there's a Doppler shift. And if you're looking at something closer than celestial distances, meaning the rays are parallel, it turns out there's a little bit of a Doppler shift. So triangular, if there's something triangular coming into the two beams, we're going to be offset in frequency by about 15 hertz. So if somebody wants to get my attention with a celestial signal with parallel plane waves coming into both antennas, and I have a 3.73 hertz filter, then put the signals on the same frequency to both antennas. If you do that, then I can be pretty sure that it's farther than the beam crossover point by about a factor of 4, or 5 maybe. And it turns out to be about 3 times the distance to the moon, roughly. That the one bin, when something is in one bin of an FFT, after all these corrections have been done. And that helps a bunch. Now we got to make sure that the antennas are pointed on top of each other. So it's really kind of after each run. I look at the data from a supernova remnant, NRAO 5690, and I compare the pattern of the continuum data. So I'm also taking continuum in addition to storing the pulses in the data files. And then I compare the continuum when we go through NRAO 5690. And this is an example of what we typically see on the two antennas. There's sometimes a little bit of an offset, maybe a fraction of a beam, but that's about as much as we've seen, is about a third of a beam width of offset. So the sensitivity is there on both dishes. One may be down at dB or so compared to the other one. This is a summary of all of the locations we've looked at so far. In right ascension and over modified Julian date, since November 2017, we started with sleep schedules and eating schedules and other difficulties in getting things running. We weren't running around the clock. And then we got towards February and April where I was sleeping down at the 40-foot. And we were just running the whole system around the clock, capturing the entire transit scan. So we're doing a minus 7.6 degree declination fixed pointing, letting the Earth rotate through the minus 7.6. And so this is 180 hours since November 2017, scanning that minus 7.6 declination arc, covering it about 9 times, roughly, if you go through all of these. Because these are actually 2 days, 2 days. Most of these are all 2 days, over a 2-day period. There's 2 lines in there, in other words. So this is what we've seen. So after I do the post-processing, then I have to say, okay, what do I really want to look like? What do I want to look at? And so I've taken only the data that is within 1 hertz. So if after doing the computation, I'm plus or minus 1 hertz, I say, okay, I'm going to take a look at that. And this is what we saw. We've seen these points along right ascension where there's a 1 hertz offset between the two. Now you can say, well, wait a minute, you only have 3.73 hertz resolution. However, if the bins actually fall on top of each other at the 2 sites exactly, you could be anywhere in that bin. And after, if the Doppler is correct, we're going to subtract the bins, we're going to subtract the Doppler, and we still should get the correct celestial frequency. In fact, this is kind of an error of the calculation of the Doppler, more than it is related to the resolution of the spectrum analyzer, where the spectrum resolution bins are falling into the same bin with the correct bin. Now, there are a few other errors and metrology things that are important to this. And I go into that in the paper, so the paper has additional detail on that. So this is what we saw. This I presented last year. This was Hipparchus 112774, and it had some strange additional pulses that occurred. And we haven't seen this repeat since I presented here last year, with a plus or minus 1 hertz offset. Now, there are other things happening out in the 5 to 10 hertz offsets, but as soon as we go out beyond about 5 hertz or 10 hertz, things happen due to noise. Just randomly, you're going to get pulses on the same frequency within 10 hertz of each other at the 2 sites in the same quarter second. So it gets statistically less significant to deal with things that are off in frequency. Statistically significant things are things that happen exactly at the same time on a very close frequency. Now, right away, I noticed these 2 points. Now, these 2 points were actually in other data that I presented over the past year since the talk I gave here. I've given this talk about 6 or 7 times around the country in various times. This is the first time I've summarized everything through April of this year. And this kind of has always caught my attention right away because it's got a 0.2 hertz offset and a 1 hertz offset. And the right ascension results in an angular difference of about 1 degree. So roughly within the beam width, you could say, well, that's 0.8 degrees, so it's a little on the edge of the beam width. But they're within 1 degree. Now, that's 1 degree, but there aren't very many points around the curve, yet 2 of them are within 1 degree. So that has some statistics associated with it, okay? The interesting thing about this is that a number of these points are at reasonably high signal-to-noise ratio. There's a 13.3, 13.3, a 13.0, 13.2, and this one was a 13.9, which is the one I presented last year. And I thought that is kind of high, because this is an exponential distribution as it falls off. You don't expect to see very many 13.9s in the data set. And when I look at the data, in fact, sure enough, it's very high up in the rank. Something like that turns out to be high in the rank of signal-to-noise rate. So we say, okay, what are these things? What are possibly causing them? And is there any significance to this? The rest of my presentation is going to just address this. Okay, I'm not going to go into all the other ones. Except I am first going to say, okay, what are the chances that you can have these signal-to-noise ratios within plus or minus 1 hertz? Okay, so that's what I was interested in and tried to find out. And so I plotted those points in signal-to-noise ratio and offset within the plus or minus 1 hertz. So this is so because there were 2 pulses for every set, right? There's one in Haswell, one in Greenbank. They each have their own SNRs. You can plot this, and there'll end up being 2 dots for each offset. Well, if everything in my calculations and the synchronization of the oscillators and the GPS constellations were correct, then the first thing somebody would say is, well, don't you have some kind of a peak of pulses around 0. If you have a peak somewhere around 0, you know, that might be significant. If you don't have a peak around 0, but everything looks uniformly distributed or randomly distributed without any peaks and no SNR peaks, well then there doesn't seem to be anything there. Well, those could be noise. Those could all be noise, but there is this anomalous collection of high SNRs that appear to be right in the plus or minus 0.2 hertz range. So that kind of gets my attention. Now, it turns out my daughter's a veterinarian, and she teaches veterinary medicine and science, and she's very knowledgeable on the scientific method. She says, you can't, or dad, sorry, you can't do anything with a population of data and just say, okay, that's significant. What you need to do is take all of your data, figure out a way to create populations based on something, and then use Cohen's d, which I didn't know about in statistics, to say this population is significant. Now, here's what happens. If you have a bell curve like this of data, and it's going like that, and each time I go like this, I'm describing a different population description, like age of person, something like this. Go like this, and then suddenly there's a this jumps over. The mean jumps. The standard deviation may be about the same, but the mean jumps like that, okay? That mean jump is very significant to the data, but only with regards to that particular population choice. Well, I'm going to take the population choice of Doppler offset, because that turns out I have all that raw data. I have all the raw data to be able to say, is there anything significant happening at exactly 0 hertz compared to the populations that are happening at 1,000 hertz or 1,100 hertz or any other frequency? And when you apply Cohen's d, it just says, what is the mean difference divided by the standard deviation? It's actually a fairly simple calculation. And if you get a high number for all the data sets, it says, yeah, the data sets have a mean offset. There is a mean offset. And we can calculate that. And it comes out to be a fairly high number. And in Cohen's d, you can say, if there's something anomalous about this population, then it has, they have various ways to describe it, but it's generally considered large or huge if it's up in this range. But we can see that if there was no significance to the signal to noise ratio of those points that were in that population of the plus or minus the center region here, then this line here, this would have been at 0 right there. This would have gone all the way across at 0. So it shows there's something very different about the signal to noise ratios in the 0.2 hertz plus or minus 0.2 hertz population. Okay, it's some kind of significance to it. Okay, so that's almost everything I'm going to say about that. The second problem is, now that we have this, we say, would anyone wish transmitting to us to leave it at just that? Well, wait a minute now, we're not transmitting much information. We got a little more power on the transmitter to deal with. Why don't we just send something else that defines that there is significance to the simultaneous pulse that occurred? So it went like that, 0.2 seconds at both sides. That simultaneous pulse may seem significant, but we're going to include something else, and I call those associated pulses. These are pulses that occur at one or both sites that are on different frequencies or maybe different times, but close in time, that statistically are very unlikely to happen due to noise. Now, it turns out in communications, if you push Shannon's limit to the limit, everything will look like megahertz with the system that I have. And when I measure it, that's what I get. I get 2.3 megahertz. So if someone wanted to get my attention, they would do something at the same time as the simultaneous pulse. They go, oh, well, I'm going to give you some close tones here, close tones here, close tones over here. Or within a couple of seconds, I'll give you these two close tones and these close tones and these close tones. And you do the math and you do the Poisson calculations. It's an exponential distribution. It's very rare to see a 1 kilohertz offset. 2 tones exceeding the signal to noise ratio threshold. And that's what we do to calculate that. So this is an example of what happened. So in one of those 5.25 right ascension ones, the one that corresponded to the 1 hertz offset, this is what the likelihood of the offset of the tones turns out to be as a function of the offset in seconds. This group is the time of the simultaneous pulse, 0 seconds. Now, the system had a 1/4 duty cycle, now it's a 1/3 duty cycle. That's why there's gaps, okay? Each of these is the collection of pulses that were stored to the file. There's about 60 of them per second and on the Green Bank file, okay? This is the likelihood that the tone spacing could be at this level in this particular interval. So we see these outliers down here where 1% of the time you're going to see a tone down here that has the offset that corresponds to that data point. Okay? These are the actual data points. These are the actual frequency offsets. So what happened is within plus or minus 8 seconds of the simultaneous pulse for the -1 hertz case, there were these tone spacings. So those tone spacings should have been roughly around 2.5 megahertz. So we can do the statistics on that and various ways to calculate probabilities. The product of the probabilities on this is 2.9 times 10 to the minus 8. So what we would expect, what we would kind of see, and what we would calculate is not too far off. We're saying, yeah, this is pretty rare because these are supposed to be 2.5 megahertz. And within this amount of time, you're seeing all these up here, and then you're seeing these outliers down here. Okay? And then we say, okay, well then, what could that be? So I wanted to have some fun with this because this is all very entertaining. So I said, okay, these things are audio, except for this one. Although young people can hear this, I'm sure, but I can't. So I decided to make a 6-tone sequence out of it. Because it is very entertaining. That's what it sounds like. That's pretty loud. Oops. I want to hear it again. Did anybody hear the 11.1 kilohertz? I can do it slow, but it's kind of painful to listen to. Anyway, that's the tone. And then when I listen to it, I thought, it sounds like for you I have this. With a delay for the 11 kilohertz, because I can't hear it. For you I have this, right? So those are the lyrics that I had for entertainment purposes. just strictly highly speculative on the whole thing. So the probabilities end up being pretty low, and we can do this in a bunch of different ways. Come up with like, how many of these should we see in 262 trials? And we get like numbers like 10 to the minus 5. Doesn't look like that's due to noise. Okay, does not look like noise. And of course, again, we've got this thing happening 1,257 miles apart. The computers aren't talking to each other. So what's causing that? Okay. Now, I calculated how often we should see the event that corresponded to those 6 tones if there was noise or anything like it in terms of offsets. So all the various combinations of offsets that could be that low. And it turns out that repeats about once every 18 years. Okay, so you don't get that collection of tones within that short period of time, except in 18 years. Well, based on the 180 hours, and the fact that we had those pulses around the circle that you saw, that event is also pretty rare. It turns out to be about every 27 hours on average. On average, due to noise, there will be an occurrence of a simultaneous pulse within 1 hertz at both sides. It'll go like that, and it'll be saved to file. But why, in that event that occurs in 27 hours, is there an event that occurs once in 18 years within plus or minus 8.25 seconds? Strange. If this was an electronic instrument driven by noise, I wouldn't be able to ship it if I was designing it, because it's producing false positives, right? False strings that seem to be coincident. So these associated pulses seem to be coincident with the simultaneous pulses. Okay, this is the -1 hertz at Green Bank pulse, the same ones we just looked at. But now we're going to look at what happened at the exact same time. Within the quarter second, there were these tones here. And this is the likelihood, based on that calculation that's on the other slide, the likelihood that this offset could occur within this, in this set. And you notice all these MJDs are the same. This is data right from the file. Just cut and paste it out of the file. And so these times are actually the posted time of the MJDs. These are the SNRs, those tones. And there's triplets, 3, there's 2, 2, 2, 2. And these little likelihoods. This has a binomial distribution like 2 in 10,000 tries. This is what that does that same pulse. So in addition to the plus or minus 10 second stuff, there's this other weird stuff that's happening at exactly the frequency, 0.26 seconds. And we captured the minus 1 hertz offset between the two sites. Okay, now let's look at the minus 0.2 hertz pulse from that pointing direction. And this is what we saw at Green Bay with 0 time offset. Okay. Now I did not see the plus or minus 10 second stuff in the data. It didn't jump out at me. There might be something there that's unlikely, but it wasn't anything like what I saw for the other pulse. By the way, those were on alternate days, August 15th and August 16th. Those two pulses occurred. And that file, I also should back up and mention that that was based on the first 135 hours. The 45 hours I'm going to talk about in a minute. Hopefully. So this also has a group of pulses in here. This is the simultaneous pulse. This green pulse right here that happened at that point in time, 13.29 dB. And then there are these 4 pulses here. Now you can see from here, we're seeing 2, 2.5, 2.7, 1.5, 3.0. The offsets here appear to be the Poisson calculated roughly differences that we would expect, 2.5 megahertz. But then there are these close ones up here that are atypical. And this has a 3 in 1,000, root 4 in 1,000 likelihood of occurring. It's not very rare, but it's still an anomalous statistical result. Okay, now we'll go to April 2nd. Now, April 2nd, in that run, I did not see anything that was close. The closest I saw in that direction, in that pointing direction, was 5.8 hertz. So this is the data for the 5.8 hertz offset. So I said, well, you know, maybe it doesn't mean anything, but if someone's trying to get my attention and they want to send me additional bits, you don't have to put it at exactly the same frequency. You can put it a little bit off in frequency. If we can figure out the technology to do that. Send things at a little bit different frequency. And I'll still get my attention, and then I'm going to look for associated pulses for that. So for this 5.8 hertz offset pulse, I look for associated pulses to see if there's anything, you know, unusual. And here's what happened at the same time at Haswell, that the associated, this is the associated pulses. So these are the pulses that occurred within the quarter second that I captured the minus 5.8 hertz at the two sites. Okay? These are all the records that occurred. I believe I put all of them up there. And it shows this typical spacing between the transitions above the SNR threshold. And right away, there's these strange things like first of all, up here, there's a close tone close to the simultaneous pulse, which is this green one, the 5.8 hertz offset. And then there's this other one that's close over here. This one it's like a 1.6 kilohertz, 1.7 kilohertz. That has a 4 in 10,000 likelihood of occurring. And then we have this one here. And then we have another one where the two tones, where the two signals at the two sites are 1.9 kilohertz apart. Another set. So there's a 5.8 and there's also a 1.9. Well, why is there a 1.9 kilohertz? They're supposed to be off by roughly 2 megahertz. Because the way it works is each is a Poisson separate sequence interleaving, and we can go through some math and kind of show that, yeah, it should also be roughly about 2 megahertz offset between the sites as well as between the tones at each site by itself. So there's some strange stuff in this set of pulses from Haswell. This is the Green Bay. This is the Green Bay, the simultaneous pulse. And the simultaneous pulse is actually within a group of 4 tones, which looks like a triplet. It has these likelihoods, 0.05, 0.04. And then there's the 1.9, 1.4, I mentioned before, difference between the two. And then there's another one over here. Now, this is not very easy to look at, so I'm going to put a graph up here. This is what it looks like in a graph. So, there are two tones here, 2 tones here, 2 tones. These red lines point to anomalous associated pulses. This is for the 5.8 hertz offset pulse. All in the quarter second. So this is all in the same, that same set of tones that just blasted both sides. Okay? So what we have here is the simultaneous pulse, or what I call the simultaneous pulse, same frequency, but it's really 5.8 hertz off, so it's not actually simultaneous same frequency. And then there's this red one, there's two close tones there, two close tones there, two close tones there. This is RF, these two I believe are RFI. And then there's two close tones there. And if you go down from there, these two close tones at Haswell, this is Greenbank, this is Haswell. These two close tones have these offsets to Greenbank. So there's a set of two close tones, Haswell to Greenbank, in addition to the 5.8 hertz, within this quarter second burst that occurred at both sides. Okay, so, and then if you zoom in on this one from Haswell, this is the one that's 1.66 kilohertz apart. So we zoom in to get this offset, and we see these two close tones right there. So this is kind of interesting because everything should kind of look like this, or like this, in terms of offsets. And none of them should look correlated to each other from site to site. So there's like something weird going on between Greenbank and Haswell. Okay, there's a lot of possible explanations for all of this. One of them is that there's a broadband pulse that just hits the whole Earth, like an FRB, one-time FRB, and it just hits the Earth in that pointing direction, and it goes wham, and it fills up a whole bunch of tones. Okay, now, so I've done a bunch of simulations and other things, and I've come to the conclusion that it's only going to produce a lot of close tones because it's noise, if it's a natural object and it's noise-like in terms of this burst. It's only going to have close tones if there are a lot of tones. Okay, you got to have a lot of strong SNR tones, and it gets a little complicated because depending on how you do SNR, then they won't appear to be strong anymore because the noise will look high. But I looked carefully at the time of that April 2nd pulse, and there weren't an additional set of pulses that exceeded the threshold. So what we saw in the previous graph and the number of those pulses that were there is typical for other times around there. So there doesn't seem to be anything anomalous right there, where there's a giant burst of tones that are creating close tones. It seems like the close tones are kind of falling there because they're kind of like, almost like intentional, but we don't know that yet. We don't know about this. And then this is the Haswell. That was the Greenbank. This is the Haswell. This point right here. So we were actually for Haswell at a fairly, we're almost close to a minimum of the number of tones that were being captured during that quarter second. So there doesn't appear to be a big burst of broadband noise. Okay, so now I'm just going to quickly go through this because this is now a summary of what I showed at the beginning, which is this is what it looks like when we look at plus or minus 4 kilohertz of Doppler shift, and then we zoom into 500 hertz, and this is what it looks like. These are the August 15th, August 16th, and April 2nd with a 10 hertz range. And we see that, yeah, there appears to be some anomalous in here compared to there. There's more kind of close to the center. And then when we look at it this way, this point, this is versus right ascension. This point, and this point are the 3 points, 0.2 hertz, 1 hertz, 5.8 hertz. And now I filtered it to only greater than 12.49 dB SNR. So I pulled the 12.4. There were actually two here on the 0.2 that were above 12.49. One there and one there. And now we can do a likelihood analysis. We can say, why would there be 3 points along this line when any other line we pick, if we were to go horizontally like this, it's pretty difficult. Well, this one kind of has 3, but it's not common that you could just pick one that would have 3 that would fall within this tiny range. And that's all. This is like 1% of this range. Okay, so we're talking about, it's pretty close to unlikely. And this is how the likelihoods, after we do binomials and count the number, et cetera, and say, well, what are the likelihoods of these? But these things would fall on that line. It's 10 to the minus 5, 10 to the minus 6. Okay, so what's going on in the sky? Well, this is what it looks like. We were pointing right there in the middle of this red circle. Hipparchus 24472 is a red dwarf, 73 light years away with a pair. This was the April 2nd sky scanning This is what Green Bank looks like. Rigel was right there. And that's what it was. It was 0.28 degrees off from the center for the second captures. And this is what it looks like for stars, close stars. Over right ascension, this is Parcus 24472. These are the close stars. There's 40 Eridani, 16 light years away. So I'll finish pretty quick because there's 5 minutes. So there's 2 ways to look at a model, proving whether models are valid or not, right? You can take your data and come up with a model and fit the model to the data and say this fits the model really well. But then you say, well, yeah, but there's a lot of other models. So every model we have to decide how well does that fit the data compared to the other ones. And then all we can really do is try to refute the models that are associated with that hypothesis. So you can never really prove a hypothesis. You can never really prove a model is true because you don't know what all the other models are. And someone else will walk in and say, oh, I know exactly what code you're using, and I know exactly you explain why this is happening at both of your sites because you're using this library and that, blah, blah, blah. And that model turns out to be perfectly the best model for the result. And I don't know that yet. So all I can do is use what is called Bayesian inference, which is a very powerful technique to compare different models against each other. And you take an open mind with regards to all the models, create all the models, match them up to the data, and use this 4-factor or this 3-factor equation, which says first, how well does that model fit the data? Just give them just that model, no other models. How does that fit it? We multiply that times the belief we have in that model. If it's too far-fetched, give it a low probability. And then we also have to divide by the probability that the data is valid. Okay, imagine your data isn't valid. It's a 0.1 probability that the data isn't valid. Well, suddenly multiplying 0.1 here is going to explode what we're looking for, which is that this model, and this model, and this model, and this model explains the data. You end up with all the models explaining the data. Why? Because the data was invalid to begin with, at a low probability. This is in the denominator. So this is the thing to use for each one of the possibilities that could occur, whether it be equipment, whether it be RFI, whether it be ETI, or whether it be noise, to work through all the models and then eventually say, yeah, you know, we've refuted all of them, except, you know, this other one is kind of bubbling to the surface. And that takes a long time. Now, there's a really big issue, which has been bothering me for about a year now since we started seeing these associated pulses. Why am I seeing lots of associated pulses at the 2 sites that are different? It's going like this. Okay, if I do the blow thing, I'm really talking about different blow-ups things at 2 sites. Why aren't some of these over here and some of these over here? And eventually with statistics, if we see enough of these things and they're different, we're going to start to wonder, maybe they were transmitted different. Okay. Now, I'm a communications engineer. I spent a long, long time working on communication systems. And today, it turns out it's all been modernized to the point where you no longer have one spatial channel going to your cell phone, to your devices. There are multiple spatial channels occurring. Turns out it's not difficult to build a phased array around a solar orbit that can produce multiple beams across a distant planet. So I did these calculations, and it turns out you can create about 100 beams across the planet Earth at a distance of 16 light years, 40 Eridani. We kind of know some of this already because of the VLBA and other telescopes and the space-based Astronomers telescope that is in space, which gives you better resolution. As you increase these distances, you end up being able to create very small beams. So there isn't a necessity for someone to transmit to us equal signals across the planet. And if they don't do that, if they decide, oh, we're going to send different signals across the planet, they've immediately created multiple spatial channels. Spatial channels from transmitter to receiver require multiple antennas, which we have in all of our devices, but they multiply the Shannon capacity by a multiplicative factor, which is the minimum of the number of antennas, whether it be on the receive side or the transmit side. It's a multiplication factor. Signal to noise ratio is a log factor. You don't want to use more energy to try to get more capacity because it's a horrible point of diminishing returns because there's a log factor in Shannon's capacity theorem. You want to create additional spatial channels, okay? So this is an example. If we were to put all of our antennas close together, like this, which would be 100th of an astronomical unit, we could create one beam across the planet. And we would be limited to say, we're only going to be able to do one spatial channel to the channel, I mean to Earth. And now you'd say, well, we'd like to increase our capacity. We have all these antennas. Okay, move the antennas out. You want an astronomical unit? We create 100 beams. This could create 16,000 information beams to the Earth. So the idea is this is not, it's actually within our technology to be able to do something like this. Okay. Then the question is, well, how would anybody do this? Well, you know, one wild idea would be, okay, so if anyone's transmitting to us, they probably listen to what we've been doing down here already with their same antennas, just convert to receive mode. And we have not been doing things that are all that great with each other. Okay? We've been kind of unfriendly. And they can conclude that information sent to us is very dangerous, and especially if it's sent uniformly to the entire planet, for two reasons. Anyone who receives a full message and is able to decode it can go off and build a better sword, or do something with that information. And almost any information you might get is dangerous. We gotta know that. We just learn stuff from technology. Almost anything gets taught to us by nature. But the second problem is that people will get scared. If they know that signals are coming in all over the planet from some distant location, they're gonna say, whoa, are they picking it up also over there? Yeah, well, they have bigger antennas than we do. They must be farther along. So you can immediately create this animosity and this fear which can drive planets into potential destruction, really. I mean, eventually it's become something that could scare a civilization. You know, some civilizations, well, we're not going to do that. Create different beams, but do it in a way so that as soon as the first signals are detected as anomalous and appear to be coming from a particular direction in space, make sure that the engineers, astronomers, scientists at the two sites, just we start with two, that each of them says, can you decode it? No. Can you decode it? No. And if I don't agree that they can't decode it at Haswell, then I'm probably going to say they can't decode it anywhere on the planet. They need the information that I have to decode it. So now that gets into coding theory and error correction, error coding, where you can say, well, if you don't have part of the message, can you still decode it? And that has to do with a lot of math and a lot of assumptions. But we could say, well, they might be able to figure out a way so that you got to have a very large percentage of the message that's transmitted to all of the areas of the planet, received in very many locations, before you can get any useful information out of this. And it's basically kind of a way of saying, look, get your act together and cooperate with each other, and then you can join the Galactic Club. That's like a short way of saying it. By the way, that's all strictly speculative. Okay? I don't claim anything. I want to make that really clear. I have no claims whatsoever. We're at the very beginning of the Bayesian inference process. So this is a third site. This is my farm in New Hampshire. This is a 26-foot dish that I'm building. It's about a month from first light. Oh, I forgot to bring the feed. I'll bring the feed up to the Drake Lounge tonight. I've got a 5-pixel dual polarization feed I'm going to be putting up here. This is the focus control. There's actuators down here. This is a cargo trailer that rotates on some tile that I put down, and it's got 4 wheels on the cargo trailer. The cargo trailer rotates for azimuth, and then I built with painter scaffolds. I reinforced the whole thing, and then I built an axle across here so the elevation goes the other way. It's all going to get motorized. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then I'm going to eventually put, I hope, as many as 25 pixels on this 26-foot dish, and also run it at a lower signal-to-noise ratio so that it can compete with the 40-foot and 60-foot. And capture, while I'm here running the 40-foot, I can have the one running up with computers in my basement, have that one running. I'll drive down here, we'll have 3 sites running. Now 3 sites, instead of that 27 hours I gave, that should be once in a million days. So once in a million days, we should see a 3rd simultaneous pulse in New Hampshire. So if the idea is to say, yes, you are going to get simultaneous pulses across the entire planet, but it's going to have such low information content, it's meaningless to you except as like an indicator pulse well, then I might see one up there in New Hampshire. And if it occurs at the same time, on the same frequency, within a hertz or even 2 or 3 hertz, and it's statistically significant, I'm going to say, okay, now we're talking about ruling out noise to, instead of 1 million, but maybe tens of millions, hundreds of millions of likelihood. So that's where it is. That's where it's at. I'm always looking for additional sites. They're all possible, and it'd be a ton of fun to keep adding sites to the system and seeing what this is all about. Okay, so Steve Plock runs the system at the DSCS. He turns on the software and lets it run for a couple of days. So I want to thank the Deep Space Exploration, all the Green Bank Observatory, family and friends. And thank you all for listening. And yeah, if you have any questions, I didn't answer anything in the meantime, but you have any questions? Yeah.
I got a question. Aren't there other SETI sites around the country?
Yeah, there's SETI going on all over.
Okay, well, couldn't you ask them to?
Well, I'm a member of the Breakthrough Listen Collaborators team. So 25% of the time on the Green Bank telescope is Breakthrough Listen. And they're using single dish beacon type search methods. Now they could be doing other methods because there's lots of scientists getting the data, and they're applying all kinds of communication principles to that. And I think that's going on. I don't know if they're doing any simultaneous measurements with that program. That is a huge program and involves parks, the SBA is coming online, and I'm sometimes aware of that. I go to their meetings every now and then. I was at a meeting last December in Berkeley with them.
I mean, it's
they are
three is 1 in a million, right?
Pardon me? 1
in a million days.
Yeah.
Three.
Yeah.
How about 5?
Oh, well then, yeah, it becomes a very problem.
Game over, right?
Yeah. Well, it's almost in a million days. Because I have to say it's on the side. Even these numbers are getting ridiculous. These are pretty difficult to explain, especially with the associated pulses. Because with the simultaneous pulses, we say, yeah, but if it's only simultaneous pulses, why would we limit our consideration to only that? We'd use the statistics of the associated pulses occurring at the same time. They're also extremely rare in noise to increase the likelihood, decrease the likelihood that a noise hypothesis explains the data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess going along the same lines, when Breakthrough Listen is using the GBT, is their pointing publicized? Is that publicly available?
So
as well as
I'm not 100% sure exactly how everything works. Like, I requested time on the GBT, and I was given time on the GBT, and I have data on the GBT, single dish, pointing at 40 or Donnie, and then but I needed raw data. So I'm building a communication system. So the files that I get cannot be processed by the averaging system and the Fourier transform analysis system. It's on the Breakthrough Listen system. I have to take the raw time data and apply it to my, basically, communications algorithms that I use for searching for these pulses. And so it gets a little bit complicated, and it's just like many other telescopes. There's a scheduling period where they pick people to be able to schedule particular areas. The data they produce, they post-process, put it onto the web with bandwidths and with integrations that are roughly 18 seconds. Now, they may have some other integration periods, but I think many of them are in the narrow bandwidth of 3 hertz or so, but integrated over long periods of time. To look for continuous signal, those files are available, open.
Okay, so you can't get a raw enough format to use.
So yeah, so I'm in the process. It's a request, and right now there's a lot of requests for raw data, I believe. So my request for raw data, not some. But there's also the issue that I might want to look at Arcus 24472 for follow-up with 1 dish. But if I use the GDT, even if I can guess that it is Hipparchus 244, if I can't guess that it's that red dwarf, but it may be some other red dwarf in that region undiscovered, well then the GBT is not going to be pointing, and I'm not going to see anything. So I could be wasting the time of the GBT for 5 minutes to do that, and then I'd have to do an off in various directions to try to eliminate RFI. And then even after that, if I only had one dish worth of data that wasn't simultaneous with the other telescopes, then my GBT data would be invalid. Now, we're working on getting the 20 meter online, there's one possibility, and these other telescopes online. And so the idea is to keep scanning that -7.6 arc, definition arc, and see if we keep repeating it. Yeah, that's a good point, is to go through that process. And anyone, and I'm like, I don't have any secrets, okay? I tell everybody what I'm doing, exactly what I'm doing, while I'm doing it, so that if anybody else wants to go off and do this, I say, yeah, go for it, and so any project that anyone wants to try, they should try.
Dinner time's good.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Obviously, food. 7 o'clock is a board meeting in here, so if you have nothing to do with your life, you can come to that. 6:15. I don't know how many people brought anything for the little fest or selling stuff, and there's a bunch of equipment will be set out in the back for you. So 6:15, 7 o'clock. Have fun.